Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The cozy, spacious kitchen was lit by the morning light. Adriana sat at the table, looking at her husband, then at her breakfast. She had the infamous oatmeal with berries again, which was making her sick. But she couldn't give up that breakfast, because there was no other breakfast in sight. And if she wanted to lose a couple of pounds, she had to sacrifice tasty food. Adriana pushed the small jar away from her, and now she was looking at her husband with her hands on her head. You know, I think I should go on this business trip. The boss says that soon she is leaving us, which means that her place will become vacant. Can you imagine if I become vice director? Said the husband with a smile. Yes, that would be good, said Adriana. She didn't listen to her husband, and there were plenty of problems without him. The more time they spent together, the more she noticed that in fact the feelings between them had long since cooled down. She had chosen him not with her heart, but with her head. She kept thinking, we'll get along. Her mother kept repeating that it is necessary to choose a husband not for love. And in the end, what happened? In the end, she sits in the kitchen and feels that between her and her husband there is a gap. Adriana was sure that her husband realized it too. Do you think I should take warm clothes? The husband asked. Adriana looked at him. Ethan realized that she was not listening to him at all. Were you even listening to me? I'm saying the weather changes all the time. Should we take warm clothes? Ethan asked again. I'm getting annoyed. Theme, how old are you? Why have you learned to make your own decisions? I'm not your mom. Can you already decide for yourself whether to bring a sweater or not? Through Adriana irritated. She left the kitchen, deciding to go without breakfast today. She went to the bathroom to put on makeup, to clean herself up before work. It was a job she hated too. Who would have thought that the very Adriana who had been prophesied to have a prosperous future was now forced to scrape by from paycheck to paycheck? She spent most of her income on her own appearance. For Adriana, there was nothing worse than growing old in her head. She was constantly thinking about what to do next, how to change her life, what to do with work and money. But every time such thoughts ended up with absolutely nothing. What's going on with you lately? Well, you've been taking everything in stride, Ethan said, stepping into the bathroom. Adriana rolled her eyes defiantly so he could see how annoyed she was. But Ethan apparently wasn't going to back down. Can we talk normally, in case you haven't noticed? You and I are still husband and wife, Ethan said. Yeah, the subject is on paper. You and I haven't lived as husband and wife for a long time. Neighbors who sleep together periodically. That's about it. You've been acting like just a neighbor for a bunch of time now, not my man, said Adriana. Here we go, Ethan said, gritted through his teeth. That's it. Subject. This is the end of our conversations with you. Don't tell me I'm acting weird. I've tried many times to repair our relationship, but it's never worked out well. Now let it all fall apart, Adriana said. She put her mascara, mirror, and powder in her bag, and then went out into the living room. Adriana changed her clothes and hung around the mirror. Her husband walked past her defiantly, as if not noticing her. He could have said some compliments to soften the situation, but he didn't need to. Adriana went outside, went downstairs, got into the car, and drove to work. Once she was in the office, things got a little easier. Her job was boring as hell, but there wasn't much of a choice right now. Adriana thought more and more about getting a divorce, moving to another city, building a career. Adriana, why aren't you wearing a face? A coworker asked. David smiled, but Adriana cringed, a grimace of displeasure. I looked in the mirror this morning. Was the face still there? She cut him off. David realized that there would be no fun and flirting today. He went to work, and Adriana looked at the monitor. When the boss walked in, Adriana didn't pay any attention to him, but there was another man walking next to the boss. Adriana's mouth dropped open in shock. She couldn't believe that she was seeing a ghost from her past again. He was smiling broadly. He seemed to have not changed at all since that time. It felt as if she was back to the time when she was immensely happy. Colleagues, I'd like to introduce you to our new department head. Meet Kevin, said the boss with pride. Brought him in. so please respect my choice." Everyone began to meet the department head. Adriana was still in shock, couldn't take her eyes off him. Is everything going back to the way it was? This is the chance fate is giving her. I hope we can work together, Kevin said with a dazzling smile. All right, there's nothing to talk about. Who's in charge of the projects? Yeah, I can see that. Now you're having coffee, get back to work. Come back to my office. We'll decide what we're prioritizing right now. One at a time. I'm gonna go over all your tasks today. Wow, right off the bat. The boss laughed. Okay, I'll leave you to your work. Adriana, who had no idea how to react, ran to the bathroom. She rested both hands on the icy sink, leaning her forehead against the glass. It was hard for her to make any sense at all right now. How could she see him here after all these years? Had he really come back to find her again? Adriana was sure he didn't even recognize her. Apparently, she had gotten too pretty. As if mesmerized, she stared at her own reflection. She looked the same as before. The tiny wrinkles were invisible. Adriana felt a lump grow in her throat. She quickly typed a message to her friend that she needed to meet urgently after work. Adriana barely sat through the rest of the workday, and when finally released from the clutches of work, she rushed to her car. The young woman tried to avoid all the traffic to come to her favorite coffee shop. As soon as she left the car in the parking lot, she entered a cozy, bright room, decorated in permanent colors. It made her feel better. Adriana, what's wrong? Wendy asked in astonishment, immediately entering after her. Apparently, she was worried about Adriana's rambling message. 2. How are you, please? Adriana said as the waitress approached them. They took their favorite table by the window. On the windowsill was a bouquet of artificial lavender that looked like a live one. Pretty soon, 2 tall glass goblets with a straw appeared in front of them. There was a pleasant pink aroma. Adriana took a few sips. Wendy gave her a chance to gather her strength before speaking up. But that crazy look and totally disliked it. Remember when I used to date Kevin? God, the one I just lost my head over. Remember? Adriana asked. Of course I remember. When he left, did you lose your mind? You cried all day long. They almost put you in a mental institution. I'm not talking about how sick your relationship was. He was just using you and you were dusting him off. Wendy cut her off sharply. Adriana brushed it off, as if none of this meant anything. It was as if she were trying to forget all the bad things she'd had with Kevin. Adriana, as if by magic. She could only see the good in their past. Wendy was the only one who was open-minded and saw all the flaws that were literally on the surface. Don't tell me you're going to get back together with him. He left you for his career. At least you pulled yourself together. You got married. Jesus, Adriana. Don't tell me Wendy started, but the young woman interrupted her before she could finish. Oh, stop complaining. I'm a big girl. I can handle my own problems. Before I could even tell you about it, you were all over me. Don't forget Wendy. You're not my mom. She cut her off. Wendy now waved it off. Apparently, she realized that talking to her friend on the subject was completely useless. Adriana herself took the gesture as a surrender. Imagine today the boss comes in and says, "Here is your new department head." I look over and it's Kevin. He hasn't changed at all. Can you imagine how annoying that is? He wouldn't even look at me. Can you believe it? Adriana resented him. He was on his knees begging me for forgiveness, and now he just pretended as if I didn't exist at all. Adriana, how many years has it been? 5 years at least. You've been seeing someone else in that time. Married Ethan. And what do you still care about some Kevin who's messing with your head? Wendy asked. Wendy had a look as if she were totally disappointed in her friend. You remember how much I loved him. I've never felt that way in my life. Wendy and I haven't had a relationship for a long time. We live like roommates. We only sleep together periodically for convenience. So I just want to try and get it back, Adriana said. Adriana, come to your senses. What's going on in your head? A herring in a barrel? Are you out of your mind? I can't believe it. I can't believe I'm gonna hear you say all this crazy stuff. You were out of your mind the other day. Do you want it to happen again? Wendy asked in amazement. You're my friend. You're supposed to support me. Adriana exclaimed indignantly. I'm also supposed to keep you from doing something stupid. I thought you'd grown up. You want to jump on the wagon that will take you to the asylum. Wendy barked insistently. Adriana was shocked that her friend did not support her. Wendy was absolutely disappointed in her friend's action. They both tried to change the topic of conversation, so as not to get into an argument out of thin air. But I think she tried to talk her friend out of it more than once, because she knew that this situation would end in a real disaster. Adriana arrived home that day completely confused. On the one hand, she wanted to feel again all the emotions that she had in her relationship with Kevin. On the other hand, she knew that Wendy was right and that this train was going to take her to a mental institution. The relationship was truly sick. The emotional swings were driving her crazy. But now, as time passed, Adriana was sure that it was better than what she had with Ethan. Ethan himself seemed to sense the change in his wife. He asked her leading questions, but Adriana shook her head negatively, trying to concentrate on making decisions. Why don't you explain what's going on? I realize you and I had a fight. So now you can't talk to me? You don't seem like yourself today, Ethan said. But biting your elbows, Ethan, your ear, or what did you think I was going to personally run around you? No, I'm done. I'm not clinging to this relationship anymore. In fact, I think we should probably get a divorce soon, she said. That was the first time Adriana had ever talked about divorce. He didn't believe her at all. Ethan laughed out loud, which just put her in a stupor. She looked at him and a silly, unnatural grin appeared on her face. Adriana didn't know how to react to Ethan's laughter. What divorce? Are you out of your mind? Everyone fights. It happens. What are we going to do? Get a divorce? Asked Ethan, who really didn't believe her words. Especially we are not 20 years old to run back and forth to the registry office. Everybody's married. Let's keep the family together. They're threatening divorce. How silly is that? I'm not threatening. It's a topic. I'm seriously saying that you and I have grown cold for a long time. We should probably get a divorce. What's the point of us living under the same roof? If we're not a family anyway? Adriana asked. Ethan waved her away. It made her even more stunned. The young woman looked at her husband and didn't understand why he didn't take her words seriously at all. Ethan laughed again, haha. You made up the divorce too. Are you going to threaten me with divorce like all these hysterics? Adriana didn't answer him anything else. She doesn't want to believe him. Well, to hell with him. He won't get his way anyway. That night, the young woman decided to spend the night alone. Her husband, who was still laughing at her antics with no problem, lay on the couch and played video games until almost morning. It took Adriana a long time to fall asleep. In the morning, she felt wrecked. She put almost under her eyes, waiting for the bears to disappear. Had to get up early to clean herself up. How are you getting ready for your date? Said Ethan with a chuckle. Adriana did not bother to answer her husband. She got ready, drove to work, and really looked much better than usual. Her coworkers remarked that she looked great. They even thought it was her birthday. Adriana, how are you looking today? Let me ask you out, said Harriton near the coffee machine. Call your wife, parried Adriana with a smile. My wife to you as to Mars. Shall we go? He asked again and laughed. The women who also worked in the office. And clearly such jokes were not appreciated. Adriana was not going to flirt with colleagues, and certainly not with a married man. Harriton didn't interest her in any way at all. She took the papers, knocked on Kevin's office door, and then entered. But hi. I knew there was more to you today. Looks like Adriana. After all these years, you haven't changed a bit. That's too bad, Kevin said. Adriana stared at him, not understanding why he was suddenly expressing regret. She put the papers on the table as if she had come just for the report. You saw that your scores are worse than everyone else's. If this keeps up, you and I are going to have to say goodbye, Kevin said, looking through the papers. Can you not pretend like we're strangers to each other? She asked. Kevin looked away from the papers, now looking intently at her face. She felt uncomfortable. Adriana felt out of place. It was uncomfortable. Why was he staring at her like that all of a sudden? There was no tenderness or sensuality in his gaze. It was dry disappointment and longing. Adriana, let me get this straight with you. I'm your boss. This is where you and I are gonna stop. Being degenerate doesn't get you anything. You're gonna work the same way you're working now. I will fire you, he said. Adriana Rose sat down in the chair beside him and playfully placed her shoe on the chair. She thought he wouldn't hold back, rushed to kiss her like he had before. But Kevin did something she had not expected at all. The man leaned back in his chair, looked her over from head to toe, and then burst into full-throated laughter. Her husband laughed at her yesterday. Laughing today, Kevin laughed. Are you out of your mind? What the hell do I need you for? Kevin exclaimed, and he laughed even louder. Adriana even had tears in his eyes. We were almost teenagers. At least you were. I thought you'd wised up in that time too, and you're still just as stupid. Adriana slid off the table and stared intently into the eyes of the man she had once loved madly. She had never imagined that it would be so difficult to rebuild a relationship with him. I don't consider you at all. I realize you're just a shadow of your past, nothing more. Yeah, if I could turn back time, I would never have a relationship with you. You've drained me of so much blood. Oh my gosh, said Kevin, adjusting his shirt. We were so good together. Do you think I've forgotten about everything? She asked, frantically trying to find the words. Adriana held back tears of resentment with all her might. His legs began to tremble. His voice, too. Kevin looked at her with a twinge of regret. Adriana, go to work, for God's sake. We're adults with families and responsibilities. There's no time for games right now. I don't need you, I don't need you. As a woman, I get it. Go to work. Leave me alone, Kevin said, pointing her to the door. Adriana pouted her lips like a child feeling monstrous resentment and disappointment. But strangely enough, didn't back down from her plan for a second. She was going to get him, and she would do it by any means necessary. Exactly a day later, Adriana has already made the first attempts to establish relations with Kevin. But her action could hardly be called expedient. Together with a friend who decided to support her, they drove 400 kilometers to reach some aunt. Adriana had found her contacts online and had high hopes for her. Adriana, I think you're starting to go crazy again, said Wendy. They were sitting in an endless line, and the hallway was stuffy, even though the windows were open. Some went in the door, some came out in tears. Some came out absolutely happy, literally glowing, anticipating the future. Adriana jerked her foot, attracting the attention of the neighbors on either side. I have to know if we have a future or not, Adriana said. Adriana, this is the 21st century. We're sitting in line to see a fortune teller. And for what? For the sake of ruining your own life, for the sake of an idiot did not stop. Wendy. Misty didn't allow for a second the idea that her friend could be happy with the man who had nearly robbed her of her identity earlier. Adriana stubbed both horns and didn't let her friend's words even fly to her ears. Think about it. Okay. Do you even need this? Wendy asked. Her voice was already shaking. Again, someone came out of the office, but this time there was no emotion on his face but sadness. It's my turn, Adriana shouted, but Wendy grabbed her arm. The young woman looked at her friend carefully, as if trying to convince her that she was making a mistake. Wendy was persistent. Adriana snatched her hand away and disappeared behind the office door. A foul odor hit her nose, incense. Some kind of white lily mint something else. The smell was sweet and cloying. I wanted to pull my sweater over my nose, just so I couldn't smell anything. Adriana sat down across from the older woman. The woman took the old woman's bony fingers over the salty deck and listened to Adriana. The old woman shuffled the deck and then laid out the cards. You're making a big mistake. The family there is strong, the old woman started to say, but Adriana interrupted her. What kind of family can there be? He's a male dog. He's not capable of making a family. Roared at Adriana, remembering the behavior of his ex. You either listen to me or get out of here, said the old woman sharply, and Adriana conciliatory raised her palms. The young woman, defiantly as if zipped up and tossed the doggy aside. The older woman nodded, accepting the surrender. She looked at the cards again. And I realize you're probably already freaking out about imagining the sweet life. But if you got him on your side, he's going to break your fate. You're meant to be a good, quiet man. If you choose another, believe me, it won't end well," said the old woman, turning over one card after another. "So I'll do it with him." Did her voice quiver? Asked Adriana. "No, nothing will work out for you. He doesn't need you, isn't attracted to you as a woman, wife, or friend. He looks at you as if you were nothing. He'll never love you as a woman." "Do you understand?" the old woman asked. "You just don't know me well." Adriana replied sharply. "But I know the maps well. You're chasing two birds. You'll be alone. Adriana, your husband is good, caring, kind. Do you need to talk? You need to rebuild your family, not chase men. Look, it's for you, Ethan, your usual. And the other one clings to him. She'll take care of him so much that he won't even move. If you lose your husband, you'll blame yourself for the rest of your life," the old woman said. Adriana stared at the old woman with even greater shock. She had expected help, not another lecture. If the young woman was going to listen to a lecture on her projected future, she would talk to Wendy. It felt as if it was Wendy who sat in front of her, not the fortune teller to whom she had traveled over 400 kilometers. "Don't fall for his charm, fool. He'll have you on the wall before you can even squeak. It's not the kind of person you should trust with your life, you know," asked the old woman. "How about I figure out who to trust with my life? You have no idea how happy I was with him. I never loved him as much in my life as Adriana said." She burst into tears of impotent anger. "So do the spell and I'll pay," Adriana said, slipping her hand into her bag and pulling out her wallet. "I don't want your money, and I don't do that sort of thing. I'm not going to do any coots for you. Go home, girl, and think on a fresh head. Why would you want to ruin your own life?" said the old woman. Adriana flew out of the office with such expression that absolutely everyone in the corridor stared at her. The young woman slammed the door so that the panes in the windows shook. She dashed outside for a breath of fresh air, then burst into tears. Wendy jumped out after her as she put her arm around her shoulders and sat her in the car. Adriana calmed down only about 10 minutes later when the tears simply ran out. She didn't say anything for the first time, just said it was time to go home. The car pulled out of the huge village and headed towards home. The young woman sat behind the wheel and looked at her friend. Adriana, who was unaccustomed to being in the passenger seat, had bought it like a mouse on grits. She crossed her arms over her chest and replayed the old woman's words in her head. She says he's got a family. He's not capable of a family. All he's ever done is run around with girls. What kind of a family man is he? Adriana asked, as if to say nothing. I found him on social media. He's got 2 daughters, like 1-year-old. Beautiful wife. Everything seems fine. If you go back too far, he's in a wheelchair. She must have been there for him. He figured it out, became a family man. That's what happens when people change their priorities after a tough situation, Wendy said. I don't care about my wife or my kids. He doesn't need them. You'll see. And she will thank me that I took the dog away from the family defiantly, said Adriana proudly. What do you need a man like that for? Wendy asked. Adriana was silent. She had no answer to that question. The young woman turned sideways, looked at the endless fields of white fluffy clouds that floated on the birch trees in the sky. It was so desirable to be at home, to lie in bed and sleep for several days. She had so many resentments against her husband, against Kevin, against the whole world. But Adriana would not give up. It's only in the movies that things go easy. If he leaves you, it won't end well. If a mistress becomes a wife, there's a vacancy, Wendy said. You don't want a man like that. You want to divorce Ethan, divorce someone else, but not Kevin. Why are you all talking at the same time? Adriana resented, as if she was already standing up for her man. Adriana, you need to calm down. Take a good look back at everything you've been through. You're going to have a hard time realizing it's all bullshit. There was too little good and too much bad. How many times did you come crying to me at night because he kicked you out of the apartment? How many times have you called me and told me you caught him texting again? That's enough. You didn't have anything good there. The usual emotional swings one gets hooked on like the joy hormone, Wendy summarized. You weren't there. You can't judge. You should have seen the way he looked at me. He's purposely pretending not to be interested in me to further ruin my interest, Adriana said. Adriana, maybe he really isn't interested in you. He has a family, a normal life, a job. Maybe you should get on with your life too, Wendy asked. Adriana didn't answer that question. She considered it too humiliating for her. She glanced quickly at her friend, but she shrugged. Apparently, she wasn't going to discuss anything else at all. So she turned on the radio. The young woman was also glad that she wouldn't have to defend her position and her decisions anymore. They would rather listen to another radio station than Adriana would prove that she was striving for her own happiness. As the car pulled up to the apartment building, Adriana's mood finally soured. She saw her mother on the balcony of her apartment, which made things even more difficult. Her mother was a terribly difficult person, and it was almost impossible to even make contact with her. This elderly woman could not imagine life without scandals and constant clarification of relations. Well, Adriana stretched out the needles. Wendy looked up and also saw the old woman and immediately understood Adriana. Yes, I'm lucky, Wendy said calmly. Knowing your mother, you can come and see me anytime. Adriana thanked Wendy warmly, apologized for her abruptness, and then got out of the car. The mother leaned over the railing, staring at her daughter. And where have you been loitering? She asked. I'm not 15 years old. I'll figure out where I've been loitering on my own. Adriana cut her off. Gone were the days when Adriana was financially dependent on her mother, living under her roof. Now Adriana could decide for herself what to do and how to respond to her mother. She didn't want to offend her either, at least not because of the heartache the older woman was putting so much pressure on. But letting her violate her boundaries was no good either. Adriana went up to the apartment, smelled the pleasant odor of fresh, cooked food. Except that her husband's face was clearly displeased. If only they always perceived the arrival of an elderly woman as a hard labor. Didn't you try calling us before you came? Adriana asked. Can I visit my own daughter already? Asked the mother. Adriana put both palms to her troops. Now she had completely different tasks dealing with Evelyn and was useless. I have to go to the hospital urgently to take tests, to pass. If it's so difficult for you to live with your mother, then pay for my hotel room. Evelyn objected uncontested. God, Mom, this is not a good time at all. We've got enough problems already, and you're just adding fuel to the fire. Adriana said calmly, sitting down on a chair. The fridge is empty. The man doesn't earn enough. Of course you're in trouble. And I told you right away that Ethan is a waste of space. If you complain to me about him, I'll tell you that you chose him. Her mother objected sharply, ignoring the fact that Ethan was in the other room and could hear everything perfectly well. Adriana didn't bother to talk about anything else. She ate quietly and then retired to her bedroom. Adriana wanted to consume a little. She needed to do some remote work in the evening. But the conflict that had erupted between her mother and her husband made her rise. Adriana sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to make a decision. I told you, you're not welcome here. Do you want to go to a hotel? I'll pay for a hotel. There's nothing to do here. And from now on, you'll call before you come here. You're in my house and suddenly you're building me up. You're not on your own turf to make a big deal out of it. Ethan persisted. Despite the heavy conversation, he never raised his voice at Evelyn. The same could not be said for the older woman. She could easily raise her voice, yell, or even get into a fight if it was to her advantage. Adriana went out into the corridor where the altercation was taking place. And you think you're a man. If I was a man, my daughter wouldn't be working. Do you even know what kind of men she had? Do you even know she's been on vacation on the islands? And with you, she's got to make every penny count. I have no idea why she chose you, Evelyn said. Outbursts howled with her hands. The older woman was clearly unhappy with the situation. There was a smug, nasty smirk on her face. Ethan began to pack his things. Adriana watched his movements carefully, looking reproachfully at her mother. only there was no strength to stand up to her mother. "You deal with your mother, then call her," Ethan said. He slammed the door loudly and left. The elderly Mullah woman retired to the kitchen. Adriana was not happy, but maybe it was for the best. While her husband was out of the apartment, she could at least weigh everything and decide if it was worth going back to Kevin. "Thank you. Tell me later I kicked yours out. What did he offer you that you'd suddenly throw yourself at him? Did you find someone to marry? You haven't had enough good men. He doesn't make a good living. He's growing a potbelly. I don't understand why you're holding on to him so tightly," Evelyn reasoned. "He loved me. At least he used to take care of me. Everything was fine. It's just that lately we've been mixing things up," Adriana said in a sad voice. "But here's the answer to everything. You should choose a man with your head, because your care always ends. Love passes, my dear, but money remains. If you'd chosen a normal man, you wouldn't be worrying about anything now. Believe me, any disadvantages in the character of the husband can be leveled by his salary," said Evelyn. Adriana sat down at the table looking at her mother. Her mother's words made her cringe. But on the other hand, Adriana herself had once thought that way. It felt like her life was splitting in two right now. Adriana had to choose. Which one to emphasize now? Maybe my rights were worth the risk. Get my life together before the divorce proceedings even start. And for another whole evening, the older woman brainwashed her daughter, telling her to look for another man. Adriana, listening to her mother, was now making a plan that was slowly forming into a strategy in her head. The next day, determined not to procrastinate too long, Adriana bought roses, candles, expensive wine. She stayed in the office late and waited until it was just her and the department head. Adriana put Frosty to sleep in the lounge area. "Put the wine glasses down." "Adriana, and what do we have here?" asked a man, holding papers in his hands. But seeing his subordinate in surrounded lingerie against a background of rose petals froze. Adriana was sure that now he would loosen his protective barrier. Could he resist her? Adriana was sure she looked even better than she had when they were dating. "Are you out of your mind?" he asked. "Don't you want it all back?" "Kevin, let's just have a drink. Let's talk. We need to talk to you. You know, we have a lot to talk about," Adriana said. "I'm trying to sound as romantic as possible. What's there to talk about? Have you completely lost your mind?" Kevin exclaimed. He was looking at her with crazy eyes. There was no passion in his gaze, only anger. Adriana was completely taken aback. She had never imagined that her plan could have a flaw. Now she looked at the man and could hardly believe that he had ever treated her with tenderness. So that's what Kevin muttered. He lowered his head, set the papers aside. The man looked tired. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, then continued. "Clean up this mess, get dressed, and get out of here. For the last time, I'm going to pretend like nothing happened. If you give me a farce here now, believe me, it'll end badly. You interfere with my work, I'll fire you, especially since you're not a goddamn employee." He just turned on his heels and walked away to his office. Adriana was left standing all alone, holding a half-filled glass. She sat down, emptied the glass completely, then a second one. Adriana changed her clothes, cleaned up after herself, went downstairs, and got into the car. The young woman howled with resentment, sobbed, and could not understand what she should do next. She was sure to the last that the romance would work, but nothing happened. Adriana felt she couldn't control her feelings at all. Never in her life had she sobbed so much or felt sorry for herself so often. By the time Adriana arrived home, her mother was already asleep. The girl got up to build a shower and tried to forget about everything. An inner voice told her that she should have made peace with her husband, to go back to her usual life, where everything could still be normalized. The other voice kept repeating that she just had to prove to herself that she was still attractive to Kevin. This was a challenge for her. "And what were you doing back so late last night? Don't tell me you went to see your man," her mother said with undisguised displeasure. Adriana did not know what to say to her mother. She was already completely confused about what was going on. But as long as the conversation was going on, it was worth listening to her opinion. After all, no one else could support Adriana. Wendy kept talking about Kevin having a family of his own. She kept insisting that she and God would be punished for depriving the children of a father. The husband wouldn't talk at all. He kept saying that he would only return to the apartment when her mother moved out. Adriana realized that she lacked support. If there was a person ready to take her side in this matter, it could only be her mother. "Mom, do you remember when I went out with Kevin?" Adriana asked, deciding to start at the beginning. "I remember, handsome, so tall, so handsome. I told you back then that girls would run after him." "Actually, that's what happened," said the mother, smirked. "But he was handsome, of course. How could he be?" The older woman was silent for a while. Evelyn was clearly trying to recall some special detail. She turned to her daughter, threatened her with the colonel. "And I told you you'd bite your elbows for missing me." And rightly so. Kevin always had money. He knew how to make money, and he kept you too. Remember, you had gold and fresh flowers in a vase. Yeah, he had his tantrums. But you could be patient. You didn't have the wisdom. I always thought he was going to stay," asked the mother. Adriana completely ignored her mother's words and continued her conversation. It was probably the only way to stop listening to her accusations about a past that could not be changed. "Anyway, he's back in town. He's my boss now, and I tried to connect with him. I even had an affair with him, and he cut me off," Adriana said. "Girlfriend says he's got a family there, kids, all that stuff. And when it scared you, if he's all family, he wouldn't give you a reason. He'd just tell you he didn't need you. Let me guess. Is he reacting aggressively to you?" asked the mother and Adriana. She woke up. It was true. Kevin was reacting aggressively to her, and that's why she was falling apart. If he didn't need her, he'd respond calmly, without emotion. All men are the same. "My dear, do you think he's not interested in you?" asked her mother. When Adriana told her in general everything that had happened between her and Kevin in the last few days. "If he didn't want you, he'd just fire you. Or something else to make it clear he didn't want you. He's putting a price on you. That's all." Evelyn stirred the soup and then sat down next to her daughter, taking her hand. "To hell with your Ethan. That fool's never gonna make any money. You're just gonna have to live from bread to water. He can't make money. That's just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. They'll get your femininity together and go back to yours. Kevin hasn't had a man turn you down yet. Adriana, get a hold of yourself already," Evelyn insisted. Adriana felt a rush of energy she hadn't even expected. She stared at Evelyn. She shook her head negatively, her lips pressed together. The older woman started talking again about Kevin being good. Everything could be brought back. Adriana would regret it if she gave up. And now the young woman's inner voice, which had been telling her to make peace with her husband, was so quiet, almost imperceptible. Now Adriana could safely attend to Kevin. She was already thinking of a plan to approach him. And even if she had to go against her conscience, break up the family, she was ready. Adriana wanted to feel loved again, as she had back then in her past with her mother's support. The young woman was sure it was only a matter of time now. Adriana arrived at work in high spirits. Talking to her mother now, she was definitely relieved. But fate apparently decided not to let her relax. "Adriana, run to the boss. He's been waiting for you for 5 minutes," Camille said, nodding toward the office. Kevin asked Adriana hopefully. Her eyes lit up unkindly. "No, to the principal's office. Mason's been pissing and moaning since this morning. So be prepared to have him and you crucified on the carpet," a coworker said in a disgruntled voice. "He's been giving us a hard time here." "What do you mean?" Adriana clarified. "Quickly change into your office shoes." Literally. Apparently, our blessed Kevin raided the place. Got the stats on who's working and how they're doing. Now all this paperwork's on the principal's desk, and he's decided to lump us all together and fire the hell out of us. He yelled at me for half an hour. "At least I'm sticking up for you." "I'm not sure about that at all," Camille said. Adriana looked at herself in the mirror, painted her lips, and went to the boss's office. A well-fed man with childishly red cheeks. Mason was sitting at his desk. He was arguing with someone on the phone. The man pointed his finger toward a chair. Adriana obediently sat down and waited her turn. Mason was generally a very hot-tempered man, so it wasn't the first time she'd heard him give her a hard time. "Well, let's get this sorted out," the man said. He looked at the papers, then looked up at her and smirked. "Why are you dressed up for work like a holiday?" "I'm in a good mood," Adriana parried, trying to speak with all the courtesy she could muster. "Well, I know your good mood. Did you even see that you have the worst scores? Adriana, how can you even work like this? You got a complaint about you from your boss." "He says he's busy with non-work issues," said Mason. "Yeah, what does he know?" Adriana said sharply, but she closed her mouth when she saw Mason's angry look. "I know you like the back of my hand. You're all about the tail wagging. Do you think no one sees you hanging around his neck, Adriana? Don't embarrass yourself. Go back to work. You're paid by the piece. And you make like a cashier at the grocery store." The man got up from his chair, walked to the window. He crossed his arms over his chest and now spoke without turning to Adriana. "Get to work already. How many times can you do this? You still think you'll find a rich husband. Adriana is not the age to believe in fairy tales. Miranda made 100 this month, and you barely scraped together 20. By God, you'd better use your looks in your work to drain clients' minds," he said. Adriana came out of the office absolutely red as a cancer. She shrank like a spring that was about to shoot someone in the forehead. She sat down at her desk and tried to concentrate on her work, but it wasn't working. The young woman didn't even look in the direction of Kevin's office. This was something he had purposely built to saw her off even more. She would put him in his place, destroy his family, lure him into her arms, and then leave him alone. The young woman felt so angry that even the plan in her head formed itself. She didn't need it. She had romance and feelings. She just wanted to put the arrogant ex in his place. After an hour, however, her fervor faded. All that was left was resentment and some subtle disappointment. Adriana tried to work, to earn some money before the paycheck, but apparently it was not her case. When she arrived home, she was happy to find her husband's car in the driveway. She was even surprised at her own joy. Maybe she should have given up the whole thing and gone back to her husband after all. There was always the possibility of trying to rebuild the family. Maybe she and Ethan still had a way to go. What if the subject decided he would try for his family? But barely had Adriana entered the apartment when immediately her hopes were absolutely dashed. Mother stood, crossed her arms on her chest, and read Von Look. "Your hubby finally decided to move out," said her mother, chuckling. "Like a rat running away from the ship. Look at him. And I told you he's got nothing to show for it. All ripped off. Adriana, take your mother out, or I won't be able to take care of myself," Ethan said calmly. Adriana went into the bedroom, slammed the door shut, and left her husband alone. Ethan didn't even look at her, just tried to leave the apartment as quickly as possible. "Something's up. Jesus, yeah, she's leaving in 3 days, and you're already running away behind my back. And if I come back later, all I'd have found were empty shelves," asked Adriana. Now she suddenly smelled a note of maternal resentment in her voice. Adriana felt ashamed that she was becoming like her mother. She felt powerless to make a decision. Her husband looked at her as if she were nothing to him. "I've thought it over. I've made a decision. We should live apart. We'll think about how and what to do. Maybe you're right. It's time to get a divorce already. There's nothing to do here," Ethan said. When Adriana herself had talked about divorce, the idea had seemed appropriate. But as soon as she heard those words from her husband's lips, pain pierced her heart. She felt resentment, anger at herself, and a longing for their past life. Adriana could not explain her own emotions of resentment. She could not even utter a word. She just looked at Ethan with her eyes. "I know it's all too complicated right now. Look, Adriana, we just need to live apart, you know. I know you're not happy about this. But you have to realize, too, that this can't go on forever," Ethan asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed. He tapped the palm of his hand beside him for her to sit up. But Adriana remained standing, looking through him. "You and I really don't feel like we have a marital relationship anymore. I'm not saying we should get a divorce right now, but we should definitely live separately and figure out what we both need." Maybe you're right, and we've gotten too wrapped up in things. Ethan asked, and then get divorced. Find yourself a girl and live like nothing happened, asked Adriana. Adriana felt a clear desire not to give him up to anyone. Some inner feeling of her own had played a cruel trick. I didn't say I was looking for someone, he said. Adriana just looked at him, afraid to say a word. Let's just live apart and see how things go. I'm going through a rough patch at work, and what are you like? You're not yourself. Shouldn't we be working through things together? Adriana asked. I've tried, but you pushed me away. Okay, Adriana. And I'm off, Ethan said. He leaned in to kiss her, but Adriana declined. The man realized he'd hurt her by leaving, but he didn't do anything more. Soon, Ethan left the apartment, leaving behind only the subtle scent of perfume. Adriana suddenly sank down on the bed and sobbed so loudly that she didn't even expect it from herself. She was crying because she realized that everything was falling apart around her. What would she do when she was alone? Who needs her with her temper? And why are you throwing a tantrum here? He's gone, and to hell with him. The trash took itself out. Mother said sharply, and then she laughed unpleasantly. How dare you say that? Adriana suddenly cried through her tears. She felt such a burning anger towards her mother that she couldn't even explain it. Adriana got up from the bed. You have taken to strutting. And you, how did we start talking? You were in my ears yesterday about your ex, and now you suddenly decided to fight for your husband, asked the mother with a smirk. Don't give me the snot. It's a swamp. What's there to cry about? You're a pacifier, not a man. You didn't keep your family together, and you expect me to be left empty-handed too. No way, Mom. Get your stuff and get out of here. If it wasn't for you, Ethan wouldn't have left at all, said Adriana. Don't you dare push me around. Yeah, look at her. You should be thanking me for walking him out. He was as worried about you as any normal man would be about moving into his wife's apartment. And in general, consider that if it weren't for me, you wouldn't have this apartment at all. The old woman cut off. It's my father's apartment. He left it to me when he died, Adriana parried. Aha, who picked that kind of father for you? The Holy Spirit cut the older woman off. Ethan's not a man at all. He's a snot on legs. He's not worthy of you. He shouldn't even be around you. You've had so many men, so many opportunities, and you've chosen some scumbag. Shut up. Get out of here. I don't want to see you. You spent my whole childhood jumping all over men. And now you've decided to ruin my family too. Go away. Adriana screamed. The old woman proudly stuck up her nose, quickly packed her things, and in just 15 minutes she disappeared. Adriana was still sobbing. Several times she tried to call her husband, but he did not pick up the phone. She felt so bad that everything inside was clenching with pain, tearing herself apart. What hurt the most was that she had absolutely no idea how to proceed or what to do next. When Adriana came to her favorite cafe, it was as if a stone had fallen from her soul. She felt calm, peaceful. But today it wasn't like that. She felt confused, as if she subconsciously sensed that the situation in her life was escalating. Adriana was losing control. You do realize you have to put up with your husband. Adriana, everyone has crises, fights. It's normal. You need to pull yourself together, talk to your spouse, and finally make a decision. You're adults. You can't just give up on him. Wendy asked. Adriana was silent. She drank coffee, looked out the window, thought about everything that was going on in her life. Outside, the summer season was slowly coming to an end. Even though it was still August on the calendar, the weather was clearly September. A pleasant cool breeze, comfortable temperature, and some kind of cozy atmosphere. Adriana regretted that the summer season had passed. She loved the heat, she loved to go to the sea, and every year she waited for the beginning of summer. And as soon as this wonderful time for her ended, everything seemed to sink into despondency. Usually the young woman found the strength to pull herself out of this sadness, to return to normal life. But this time there was so much on her that she could no longer carry it all on her shoulders. Do you think he still thinks about me? Adriana asked. You're married, aren't you? Of course we are. It's just that you're in a crisis. We need to talk things over calmly, meet, and not make hasty decisions. Everyone needs to be apart from each other from time to time. It's just that you're both having problems. That's why you're fighting with each other. But when you get through it together, the crisis will be much easier. You'll see, Wendy said. I don't mean Ethan, Adriana said grudgingly. Although I don't know who I'm thinking of anymore. I miss the subject too. And I hate myself for not going with Kevin to another country. Why the hell did I stay home here? Adriana's eyes were wet. Dua didn't take her hand to reassure her. Everything squeezed inside. I'm so angry with myself and with him. I want time to turn back, for us to be together again. But on the other hand, I want to go back to Ethan, to be calm and quiet. I must be going crazy. Some kind of endless obsession, Adriana said. Maybe you should take a vacation, or quit this job and find another one. You won't have a life there anyway, as long as Kevin is there, Wendy said. As soon as Adriana thought about quitting and never seeing him again, Kevin became uncomfortable in her heart. She no longer realized whether it was actually feelings, nerves, or real feelings talking in her. Adriana could no longer understand where the real feelings were and where her heightened nervousness was. They sat in the cafe for about an hour, several mugs of coffee, empty plates from dessert left on the table. Wendy walked Adriana to her car. They stood in the parking lot but couldn't separate. Let's go on vacation with you. We'll be near the sea for at least a few days and say goodbye. With summer, you'll have time to breathe. Adriana, you have too much on your mind right now. You're not thinking straight. You need time, said Wendy. Adriana did not react to this suggestion, but as soon as she got into the car, she decided that she would make one single attempt. But this time she'd go to the bank. Yesterday, Kevin was flirting with her. At least it seemed that way to her, which meant he still had feelings for her. For days, Adriana had been tracking Kevin and his wife. She had clearly calculated the schedule of the woman who took the children to daycare, then to clubs. Adriana calculated the times when Kevin's wife was not home. Adriana arrived, walked to the entryway, dialed a number. She called another apartment, identified herself as a delivery person, and was let inside. Overjoyed, Adriana took off up the stairs. She knocked on the door. Kevin opened the door with a smile, but when he saw Adriana, he was taken aback. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Have you lost your fear? He asked. Your wife won't be here for another hour, so we have time. Adriana said affectionately. She wanted to rush into the apartment, but Kevin pushed her away rather roughly. Sick in the head, Adriana. Pull yourself together, otherwise I'm gonna ride you. For Java, by God, I don't need you at all. Get out of here, he shouted. Adriana salivated. From how wildly he shouted at her, his voice echoed off the walls of the entryway, becoming even louder and more menacing. The young woman, looking into the eyes of the man who on his knees had sworn his love to her, could not believe that he had changed so much in so many years. But even though the scream released his anger, Kevin did not become calmer. Rather the opposite, he was getting angrier and angrier. His face was starting to turn red. Adriana got the impression that even the top of his head was turning red from how much negativity he was holding back. You've always been just a toy to me, you know. An underage fool who fell for the gifts. That's all. I never needed you. I never loved you. Hear me at last. Kevin continued to shout. He didn't even think about the fact that the neighbors could hear this conversation. He was so mad with anger that he lost control of himself. You gave me a sweet life back then, and I've been trying to get rid of you for a long time. I have a normal life, a beautiful wife, a great job. But then you show up again. You're trying to build a relationship with me over some interesting hunch. You're sick in the head. Be honest with me. Maybe you need to see a specialist, shouted Kevin. Adriana couldn't utter a single word. She was crying tears of fear and frustration. She felt completely fictional, sucked dry. She stared into his insanely angry eyes and tried to find a shred of sympathy for her in them. Idiot, I don't need you. How else do you want me to tell you? He shouted. But you're flirting oval with me, Adriana muttered in a trembling voice. You're sick. Do you take common courtesy for flirting? Is that supposed to be fun? I have a beautiful family. I love my wife dearly. and you come in here and ruin my life. Either you leave here now or I'll throw you down the stairs, he said, taking a step forward. Adriana involuntarily backed away, lost her tears, and then ran down the stairs. She couldn't even make out the road as tears made her eyes water. It was so hurtful, so bitter, she could barely hold on. But as soon as the entryway door swung open, Adriana ran head-on into Kevin's wife. Oh, sorry, involuntarily involved Adriana. Noticing that this young woman was so soft, decided to push through. If this idiot failed to see the potential in her, she will get back at him. I'm sorry, before you tell Adriana your man I'm sorry. And I slept with him the whole time you were here with your kids. He promised me he'd marry me. He promised me a nice life. Now, Barton, go deal with your cable. Don't listen to her. She's a sick fool. Get out of here. A man shouted from the window. Adriana saw what had gotten through to the fragile nervous system of Kevin's wife. The young woman froze in her eyes. Tears and a dull ache appeared in her eyes. Adriana waved her head smugly and walked to the car. She walked with a sense of accomplishment, confident that she had at least mutilated Kevin's life. Adriana drove home, so proud, so happy that she couldn't believe it herself. She hadn't felt such a triumphant feeling in her chest in a long time. But the closer Adriana got to home, the more she realized what a monstrous mistake she had made. Why had she even reached into the family in the first place? Why had she said mean things to his wife? Maybe he really wasn't flirting with her, but was just being polite. Adriana is on shaky legs, walked into her own apartment and just cried in the shower. She tried to call Kevin, but immediately realized she was added to a blacklist. Everything was so stupid that she wanted to fall through the ground. As soon as Adriana left the shower and went into the kitchen, she immediately poured herself a full glass of wine to the brim. She turned on some stupid movie, drank wine, and replayed in her head the nightmare that had happened in a matter of minutes. She was disgusted with herself. As the wine began to take effect, the young woman gradually calmed down. She longed for her husband so much, felt so foolish in his eyes, that she could not help herself. And when she heard Ethan's voice, she was relieved for a moment. "Yes, I'm listening." "Just speak quickly, please," Ethan said, a little flustered. In a flash, Adriana had a picture in her mind of her husband sitting in a cafe with some girl. Or maybe he'd taken her to the restaurant to get her into bed. Jealousy surfaced in her with renewed vigor. It was right, and Adriana wouldn't be able to forgive herself. And if she misses her husband? "Adriana, I told you to make it quick. We're in the middle of a work emergency." "I'm not even on the phone right now," Ethan said, as if he could read her jealousy-filled mind. For a few more seconds before the call started, Adriana was full of confidence. She knew what she was going to say and how this conversation would end. But now it was as if she swallowed her tongue and began to stutter. "Topic, you and I need to talk. I missed you so much. We really need to solve everything. I'm not a bad person," she said and cried. "Adriana, I'm not interested in your tears right now." Ethan said more calmly and quietly, "Let me call you in a few hours. I don't have time right now. I'll live alone for now. I have to think about it." Adriana hung up the phone herself. The young woman leaned back in her chair and just stared at one point. How was she going to live her life now? Would he really divorce her? She almost destroyed her own family to get back together with her ex. And for what? Adriana felt so stupid all of a sudden that she felt disgusted. Ethan had been right to just pack up and leave. She wasn't worth it. Adriana lowered her head with her forehead, touched the cold table. Somehow she felt so sad that she couldn't put that sadness into words. She didn't even want to cry. It just hurt. If they'd gone to a counselor, maybe they could repair their relationship and start communicating like they used to. Ethan would start courting her again. Adriana would have given him some nice romantic surprises. Would it all fall apart now? If Ethan wanted to be with her, he'd probably come over right now, apologize for his behavior, and they'd start living together again. This empty apartment was completely foreign. When Ethan wasn't there, Adriana missed him terribly. Now all her fiddling around with Kevin seemed like nonsense. She hadn't cheated on her husband. She'd gotten over it. Adriana felt like a traitor. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had no right to rebuild her relationship with her husband. On Monday, Adriana was going to work. Everything was falling out of her hands. There was a bad feeling. Everything was so mixed up in her head that Adriana wouldn't even react if she was fired. She got in her car, pulled out, and just headed towards the office, wanting in all seriousness to turn around, stay home, call her boss, and quit. Turns out Adriana was right on the money. When she got to the office, no one wanted to talk to her at all. Everyone walked around with their noses up their asses, like she was some kind of stranger. Adriana had worked here for years. Why the sudden attitude? Always helping everyone. Never fought with anyone and certainly never tried to drive anyone out of the workplace like some people. It's better to quit well, Camille said, crossing her arms over her chest. Yes, Camille is right, said Miranda, adopting the same pose. They stood like twins. Even their dress code was similar. Adriana still didn't understand what was going on. Staring at her former coworkers and friends. Now it seemed she had clearly crossed them. Girls, what the hell is going on? This isn't about jealousy. I make less money than you guys. Adriana said with a chuckle, what the hell is going on? You decided to ruin your family, and then you come here and think you'll be patted on the head. David asked in amazement. Now everyone was turning against her. Literally, the whole office was standing as if waiting for the trial. Adriana involuntarily took a step back. She looked into the faces of the people who hated her overnight, although just a few days ago they had hated her. David, have you forgotten that I'm the reason you work here? I'm the one who brought you here. Insistent, said Adriana. And you, if it wasn't for me, I would have fired you 6 months ago. Miranda, I was actually filling in for you on maternity leave so you wouldn't get fired. Are you two in cahoots? Adriana exclaimed in amazement. Surprised at their ingratitude. Adriana, come into the office, said the boss. Adriana took a deep breath, exhaled, looked at everyone with the most angry look she was capable of. She walked into the office of the warden. He immediately handed her a glass of cold, sparkling water. Adriana sat down in the chair and lowered her head low. She realized that apparently the situation that had happened the other day had become public knowledge. Yes, I understand. I made a huge mistake. I'm so sorry. I even tried to call him and tell him how stupid I was. I got emotional. Now I feel like a complete idiot, said Adriana. You know, I don't care who you slept with, what you were going to do. I don't even care about his family. This is my business. And business is money. Dear Adriana, I could go out on the street and pick up a dozen of them. So I can't call you a valuable employee. But the likes of Kevin, you can't find anyone like Kevin. If you knew how hard I worked to get him in here, you'd think a little more about your stupid head, the boss said. Adriana remained silent. She took the insult in stride. There was, after all, truth in what the superior had said, wasn't there? She was still silent, waiting to see what would happen next. But judging by the mood of the boss, only dismissal awaited her. What statement to write? She asked. Yes, be kind enough to write at your own request. I'll calculate your money right now. You don't have to work the extra 2 weeks, he said. Negatively shook his head, Adriana grimaced. She calmly wrote the application and took the money. She left the office. She did not look at everyone who sat in the office and now squinted angrily. You're like a flock of sheep. I've helped you all. Yeah, a lot of you wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for me. No, you fell for it. Took a lynch mob and lived with it all you want. I'm not going anywhere with you. Adriana cut her off sharply. She slammed the door, went downstairs. Adriana stepped out into the parking lot and suddenly felt the brakes sound. Darkness had fallen. It's okay, wait. There were monotone voices, probably all different people talking. Adriana felt pain, then nausea from the pain. Her head was spinning in her ears, noise crackling in her ears. Let's be careful. Another voice sounded, already lower. Adriana felt herself being lifted up, placed on something, suddenly a needle. Then came bliss. Nothing. The pain seemed to gradually dissolve, leaving behind only memories. After about 20 minutes, Adriana realized she was sitting in an ambulance. "So calmly look over here," said a very thin woman, checking her pupils. "You look like you've been hit by a car. We're going to the hospital now. We're going to check everything out. You look fine. Don't look at your leg. We'll figure it out. This isn't the 15th century." Adriana looked at her foot, against her warning. It was covered in blood. She burst, threw her head back so she couldn't see anything. "At least I didn't feel any more pain." She was brought to the hospital. A couple more hours later, she was sitting in the waiting room. The situation wasn't critical, so it was okay to not leave her in the hospital. Adriana had no one to count on. Even with Wendy, she and Wendy had had a falling out. And when she saw Ethan at the hospital door, she just cried. He looked at her with the same love and tenderness he had before. As soon as he sat down next to her, Adriana snuggled into his shoulder and told him everything. "Please forgive me, I'm so stupid, God, I'm just an idiot. I'm going to see a psychologist, honestly. I'm so sorry, please. I don't want to go on being without you," Adriana said. He just listened to her. It felt like Ethan was aware of the situation, so he didn't react. He helped her up and walked her to her car. They drove to their apartment. An hour later, Ethan brought all of his things back. Adriana noticed that the vast majority of the suitcases remained closed. Apparently, he wanted to go back, but he kept hesitating. "I will always appreciate you. This is a lifelong lesson for me." "Forgive me, please," Adriana said. "I had an affair too, but flirting like that and at work. And I thought I was falling in love again. We didn't have anything. Just one meeting. We didn't even kiss. I just wanted to be alone to figure out what was more important to me. And I realized I don't want to start over. I want everything back with us, especially since the two of us now realize we have to try," Ethan said. That night, they never went to bed. The couple talked for a long time. Well, they finally came to an understanding. Early that morning, as Adriana was about to go to jail, all she could think about was her husband. After everything that had happened, it was as if the relationship had grown deeper and stronger than before. It would be a lesson to both of them that you have to have a relationship. You have to work at it and not just run around looking for new feelings. Gradually, the broken leg would heal, and their relationship would become even stronger. Ethan is back to being the caring person he used to be, and Adriana much more tender and affectionate. They were talking to each other again, as if the relationship wasn't even a couple months old. But one day, 2 weeks after Adriana had been in the hospital, she saw a familiar car under her windows. Taking her crutches for comfort, Adriana stepped outside, well aware of who had arrived. Kevin stepped out of the vehicle. For the first time in a long time, Adriana felt absolutely nothing but dislike for him. He was now a complete stranger to her. No, Adriana didn't blame him for anything. After all, she was the one who made up the perfect relationship in her head, not him. "Look, we need to talk, but without yelling," Kevin said. "Talk here in the apartment. I won't let you in," Adriana said calmly, looking at him blankly. "Anyway, it's my fault. I should have talked to you calmly instead of making a farce of what you took for a game. Anyway, they fired you for me." Anyway," said Kevin, holding out the papers to her. "There are checks for payment. I totally bought online training for you. There's job placement, so you'll have a new job if anything. I'll take over financially while you study." "Why so excited all of a sudden?" Adriana asked. "I don't understand why he's being so soft on her. A few weeks ago, he nearly threw her down the stairs. And now he's being nice, offering to help her financially. My husband earns enough to keep me in school." Adriana caught herself thinking that she spoke of her husband with pride. Everything inside her was now in order. "It was my sister who hit you. Or rather, she just wanted to scare you. But she overdid it. Anyway, now she's hiding in the middle of nowhere, afraid you'll report her," he said. Adriana looked up at him in surprise. She and his sister had once been best friends. And now what? She was afraid you'd break up the family and leave the kids without a father. Like I can't make my own decision. Anyway, I hope you and I can work something out. I'll pay for the treatment. What else do you need? Kevin spoke calmly. "I won't write a statement. Tell her thank you. If it wasn't for her, maybe the bright thought of reconciling with my husband wouldn't have appeared in my stupid head. That, first of all, Adriana said, and then looked at the papers. Thank you so much for paying the tuition for this year. I will get a new profession. A great chance for me to start over, and I don't need any collateral. It was immediately noticeable that a mountain had literally fallen off the man's shoulders. He exhaled, smiled. He was immediately relieved. When the car pulled up, Adriana looked at her husband with a smile. He was clearly disturbed by the stranger. And I brought the severance pay, Kevin said, pointing to the papers. Well, okay, I gotta go. Thanks for compromising. She nodded. He didn't seem like a handsome, promising guy to her now. He was just a man who was a total stranger to her. And really, if you took off the rose-colored glasses in their past relationship, there hadn't been many good times. When Adriana took the elevator up to the apartment with her husband, she told him about the papers and the training. Are you really not going to write an application? Asked her husband. No, I won't. Let's consider it my punishment for being too long-nosed and overconfident. I still have some work to do because I feel guilty still. Calmly, she said. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions. Adriana had been trying to build up her courage for days, but she realized it was impossible. She just had to go and do it. The young woman drove up to the very apartment where she had once caused a scandal. She sat in the car for several hours until she saw Kevin's wife come out into the yard with a stroller. I'm sorry, Adriana said softly. The woman's face turned stern in an instant. She looked at her with a kind of implacable anger. Adriana understood her feelings perfectly. I came to apologize calmly, Adriana said. I had some kind of adolescent maximalism, my complexes and stupidity in my head. I just wanted to apologize for what I said to you about your husband. Nothing happened between us. He sewed me up and kept telling me he had a beautiful wife. The more Adriana spoke, the more the woman's face softened. She suddenly noticed that Adriana already had tears glistening on her face. I almost lost my husband because of this idiocy. I'm really sorry I was staggered. And your family is wildly ashamed that I looked like a fool and almost ruined your life, Adriana said. Well, apology accepted. If you want to help, I'd be happy to. With a smile, said the woman. Adriana nodded vigorously. They walked to the store together. On the way back, Adriana carried heavy bags of groceries. At the bottom of the stroller were bottles of clean water. It's not so smooth sailing for us. So you were just the last straw. I hope we can find the strength to reconcile and keep the family together. We have daughters growing up. I don't blame you. I know exactly how my husband behaves. All his courtesy and supposed politeness often looks like flirting, the woman said in an unhappy voice. Thank you for helping me carry it. I live alone now. It's a bit hard to cope. Apparently he hasn't changed at all, Adriana said, and the woman nodded. I guess he has. It's not for nothing that my mother told me that people don't change, and you shouldn't expect others to change. All right, come on. I'll take the carrier. And you stay with the stroller, please, she said. Adriana was alone with the stroller. The 2-year-old was sound asleep, or maybe she was under 2 years old. Adriana had no idea, no way to determine the ages of children since she had none of her own. And as a child, she hadn't taught anyone. When the woman came out of the entryway again, already behind the stroller, she looked a little sad. Thank you for apologizing. It means a lot to me, she said. When Kevin gets back from his business trip, I'll tell him you came by. It'll make it easier for me and him to fight. Thank you for forgiving me, said Adriana with a guilty smile. For a few minutes, Adriana sat in the car just looking out the window. She felt many times better when she finally apologized. Maybe it really was worth it. The shame had gotten much worse than it had been before the apology. But the more time passed, the weaker it weakened. A few days later, Adriana received a message from Kevin saying that he was grateful for her apology. He was able to repair his relationship with his wife, and now he won't do anything stupid. Adriana told Ethan everything. He was very proud of her for apologizing. Even before the cast was finally removed, Adriana and Ethan started to see a family psychologist. It turned out that they had accumulated a large number of mutual resentments that they had not spoken about. After the first sessions, it was hard to restore balance in the couple. But the longer they practiced with the specialist, the easier it was for them to reconnect. The relationship became more tender and deeper. A shared hobby emerged, and they also learned to sit down and talk every week and come up with something to do together. A year passed. Adriana learned to get a job. She started earning good money. At the same time, without leaving the house. She liked her new profession and was grateful to Kevin for it. As it turned out, Kevin did not stay at the new workplace for long. He quickly replaced the director and took his place. As far as Adriana knew, Kevin and his wife were still living together. They were expecting their third child. Adriana didn't know how smooth their relationship was. She didn't want to meddle with other people's destinies anymore. Adriana reconciled with Wendy. They were best friends again, just like before. Adriana was very grateful to Tommy for trying to talk her out of it. Wendy had gotten married and they were now family friends. There was no way Adriana could wait for her husband to come home from work. She was holding a small gift she wanted to give him for their anniversary. She was insanely grateful to herself for such a lesson. She had never been happier in her life than she had been since she had decided to keep her family together. They finally had harmony, true love, quiet happiness. "I'm home," he said. Entering the apartment, Harris sprinted out into the hallway to him before she could wait. He held in his hand a small cake and a bouquet of flowers. "Happy holiday, beloved. Happy holiday. I have a present for you, by the way," she said. She smiled radiantly. Adriana handed him the box. Ethan put it on the shelf. He changed his clothes and then, taking the box, opened it. The man thought it contained the watch he wanted, but there turned out to be a truly lavish gift, tied to a red ribbon. In the box was a positive pregnancy test. Ethan sat on his ass like that. "It's true. I've even been to the doctor already. They all confirmed the subject you're going to be a daddy," she said and cried. He suddenly picked her up and from his seat lifted her in his arms and surrounded her. He kissed her endlessly. "Oh my God, is it really true? We're going to be mommy and daddy." He repeated a little, "And I can't believe it myself. Can you believe we're going to be parents? Can you believe it?" She repeated through tears years of trying behind her. That evening they spent in love and understanding tenderness, imagining how they would have a baby, how they would cope with difficulties together, as if this child was a reward from above for the fact that they were able to keep the relationship. And Adriana herself was madly happy that fate had given them such a gift.
Subscribe and click the bell. We can finish here. The head of the legal department of the ECO Construction Company folded the documents neatly into a plastic folder and smiled. "Gentlemen, I suggest we finish our meeting at the restaurant. There's a great seafood restaurant here at the hotel. The table's set. We can go downstairs right now." The deputy general manager waved his hand hospitably toward the elevators. I sighed. We had just signed a lucrative contract that our firm had been pursuing for years. But the last thing I wanted to do was spend the evening in a restaurant. To be honest, I missed my wife and son. We've been living together for 5 years now, but I still lose my head like a boy when I see my wife. I guess I'm a one-woman man, and there's nothing I can do about it. I can't bear to be away from my family. As I stacked up the signed papers, I puzzled over what reason I could come up with to go home today. If I leave now, I'll be home by morning. True, it's quite a long drive, almost 500 kilometers. But that's okay. I have long been used to long distances and abnormal situations. Ever since I was in the Army, Robert, I'm very embarrassed, but I won't be able to attend the banquet. There are problems at home, so I'm leaving right now. In any case, you will visit our firm soon, and I will do my best to make up for my departure today. I made up an excuse on the fly and now tried not to look in the eyes of the general. That's okay, Christopher. After all, the banquet is not the main purpose of our meeting. I think we still have a lot to do. Robert smiled, and we shook hands firmly. In my room, I changed my clothes, packed my shirt and business suit in a plastic bag, pulled on the usual camouflage for the helm of my boots, and put a silver medallion on a leather lanyard around my neck. In such clothes, I felt much freer and more confident. Without wasting time, I threw my things into the car, checked the note, and in half an hour drove off the ring road onto the highway leading to my hometown. At home, thank God, I was fine, no problems. I just wanted to hug my beloved wife and son quickly. Gradually, it was getting dark. It was early fall before the prolonged rains, and the first frosts were still far away. The road was deserted. Only at the bends roadside bushes sprinkled on me, caught out of the darkness by the headlights of my car. The engine ran smoothly without strain. I lightly stoked the gas pedal, bringing the speed to 120 kilometers per hour. The cruising speed of my car. I myself rebuilt the engine vectors, spent almost a month, rewelded the sills, scaled holes, and painted. The car is a real Japanese, made for the USA. Got it to me for a ridiculous price. I remember the surprised, squeamish face of my wife and brother, but frankly, I didn't care about that. The main thing was that I liked the car. My grandfather, my father's father at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, confidently held on to the chair of the general director of the metallurgical plant. I don't know how, but after a while he became its owner. He managed in this turbulent time not only to save the plant, and accordingly, the workplaces, but also by carrying out reconstruction, to reach the leading positions in its branch in our country. Time passed. The plant prospered. Grandfather managed to buy and build several more production facilities, expanding the scope of his activities. One of the new areas of activity was the organization of production of steel structures for construction. This direction was headed by his son, my father. Today, on his behalf, I signed a lucrative contract for the manufacture and supply of steel, load-bearing beams for a huge construction company, bringing my father's firm to a new level. But despite some independence, all the threads of management of the huge household were at my grandfather. There are two of us in the family, me and my brother. We are twins. We are already over 30 untrained people can't tell us apart. At first, our parents could hardly distinguish us. I'm the oldest. 20 minutes after I was born, Stephen was born, and that sealed my fate. I don't know why, but my parents gave all their love to their younger son, forced to measure with my existence. Everything was for Stephen. Toys, tutoring. As the eldest, I had to defer to my younger brother in everything. No one was interested in my interests and desires. Stephen went to tutors, studied music, always wore a clean suit, and learned good manners. I grew up on my own. I taught myself to play guitar and enrolled in the hand-to-hand combat section. I studied averagely, but after the 9th pressed on studying and soon was in the first 5 on academic performance. What to be? I didn't think much about it. I was easily given to exact sciences, and I was going to enter the Mechanical Engineering Institute, but life arranged otherwise. In 11th grade, I fell in love. The girl was wonderful. Our relationship was extremely serious, and we decided to get married right after school. Adriana was also going to university. We decided to be a couple and live together in a dormitory. They were willing to give us a room. I took everything into account, except one thing. 2 weeks before the wedding, when I had already bought the rings, Adriana called me and stammered and asked me to meet her. Okay, no problem. We agreed to meet at the park near the fountain. I knew the place well, as I often went there with Adriana to dance. I arrived early and had time to smoke while waiting for the bride. Finally, Adriana appeared, and not alone. She was holding Stephen, dressed in his trademark jeans and leather jacket. When she saw me, she abruptly let go of his hand and came over to me. "Hi, you've been waiting a long time." As if it mattered now, it was clear to me. Stephen couldn't get over the fact that I had a girlfriend. Like everything else, she had to be his. I shrugged silently. We don't need to see each other anymore. My ex-fiancée carefully averted her eyes. All the sorrow in the world seemed to be centered in her shaky voice. I was in love. Adriana, I understand. I don't need to explain. I caught my brother's triumphant look. I turned and headed out of the park. The next day, I went to the enlistment office and applied to join the Army. My father was indifferent to my decision. I did not voice the reason for my decision. My mother didn't care about me. She was busy with another extended shopping somewhere abroad. So within 2 weeks, I received a summons, passed a medical examination, and was drafted into the internal troops. At the recruitment center, I was sent to the intelligence of internal troops, having scrutinized my body for the presence of tattoos. On my perplexed look, the warrant officer paramedic said a tattoo for a scout as a business card. It remains to fill the last name on the ass for full happiness. Remember, kid, tattoos are for prisoners, morons, and prostitutes. And so began my service in intelligence. I was a tough and stubborn guy. Soon I began to do well in the service. By the end of the first year, I was already a sergeant, a squad leader. I tried to study military science well. I finished sniper courses, learned to drive a car in extreme conditions. I achieved good results in hand-to-hand combat. I was offered to take tests for the right to carry a green ticket. I passed them the first time. Several times I was in hot spots as part of my company. For participation in one operation, I was even awarded the Medal of Honor. I don't know for what reason my call sign was a connecting rod. It happened 2 months before the end of my service. I was ordered to take an artillery adjuster to an observation post and cover him while he worked. The winter sun was already rolling toward sunset. It got very cold. Breathing scouts. Fog beat between the leafless trees, sticking out here and there on the slope, from where the adjuster dictated the coordinates of the targets. Finally, the crimson sun was finally hidden behind the horizon, which meant that not a single ray of it could give us away, repelling the attack through binoculars or telescopic sights. In the distance, a mountain river rushed southward with a gray ribbon. On its left bank, the enemy was concentrating its forces. The task of the squad was as simple as a song, to stay undetected for as long as possible, and to identify enemy targets as much as possible, and to get away as quietly as possible. Further worked artillery. The adjuster was already finishing to transmit the coordinates. The target, as on us from the rear, struck a machine gun. Bullets with a horse crashed into the world-evil ground. Around me shrieked and dropped his head adjuster. I snapped back with short bursts from my Kalashnikov rifle, trying not to let the enemy get too close. It was completely dark, and I could barely make out the silhouettes of the enemy. I tried to contact the company commander over the intercom, but there was only crackling in my headphones. The enemy is competently jamming our frequency, not giving the opportunity to establish a stable connection from our side. No one was firing anymore. My fighters were probably all killed. A click and my machine gun went silent. I was out of ammo. I pulled out my Stetkin pistol and pulled the bolt. 2 shadows rushed toward me from the right, not aiming. I fired several times in their direction. It seemed to hit. I realized that I could not get out. But that was the order. I turned to the killed adjuster and, covering myself with his body, I flicked the radio switch, switched to the spare frequency, and began to transmit my coordinates, thus calling the artillery fire on myself. The machine gunner detected my movement and opened fire again. I felt the bullets pounding into the dead body. I wasn't scared. I was just mentally dead already, clearly realizing that only a miracle could save me. The last thing I remembered was the whistling of shells and the rumble of bursts all around me. Then the remnants of my squad made their way to me and pulled me stunned to the rear. I didn't even have a scratch, just a slight contusion. Apparently, God still needed me for something. Just before I was discharged, we who survived that battle at a jeweler we know, we ordered medallions as a souvenir. The material we had was a broken silver cross we found in a ruined Orthodox church, enough for everyone. Only 7 people survived that battle. The time of service flew by quickly, and I was soon demobilized. I took away with me the medal for bravery at the station. To my great surprise, I was met by Zarek Naya, former fiancé. Adriana frantically clutched at the sleeve of my camouflage and sobbed hysterically, asking for forgiveness. I even felt a little sorry for her, but I ripped her fingers with red-painted nails from the sleeve and, without saying a word, walked to the cab stand. She remained standing on the platform, hands clasped in despair, looking at me with tearful eyes. "You can't forgive traitors." Yeah, I guess her life with my majority didn't work out. Brothers, my parents had moved to a mansion outside of town. Stephen, who had graduated from the capital's technical university and was already vice president of my father's firm for economic relations, lived with them. I didn't go home for a few months. I stayed with a bachelor army friend. I applied to the Institute of Mechanical Engineering, arranged to live in a dormitory. I had no desire to meet my relatives, and even less with my brother. A month after my return, my grandfather found me. We drank tea with him for a long time in a small room in the dormitory. And then he unexpectedly offered me a job at the Combine as an auxiliary worker in the machine shop. What did you think? A director. I needed the money. The work schedule was flexible enough, so I accepted. I worked that way for almost 5 years. I met a pretty girl named Betty at a party, and after 6 months of courting, I got married. I didn't plan a big wedding on her, but on the day of the wedding, my parents came to our banquet with a table. Betty was shocked. She stared at my brother and me for a long time, marveling at our resemblance. My father gave us an apartment and a car for the wedding. My young wife was over the moon. She did a slow dance with my father and brother. And at the end of the evening, I happened to catch a lustful glimpse of my wife alone. A year later, we had a son out of happiness. I was as if in space. We lived with our relatives. Stephen stopped by to visit us a couple of times, but no creeping towards Betty on his part. I did not notice. 6 months ago, I successfully graduated from the institute, and my father appointed me deputy head of the marketing department. In my firm, I was directly subordinate to my brother. I started traveling, auditors, signing contracts. Everywhere Stephen put me. My wife was initially dissatisfied with my frequent absence, but then she got used to it. That's how we lived all this time. The car brought the hell back. I think I dozed off, took to the curb and pulled over, turned on the emergency lights, got out of the car, and did a few push-ups. Patted myself on the cheeks. It was early. I began to fall asleep still. Only the first hour smoothly moved from the place. The road, like a gray snake, wriggled under the wheels. Behind the next corner of the headlights illuminated a large black car pressed against the curb. I could clearly see a thin female silhouette desperately struggling between the two large black figures. Her chances of success were practically non-existent. The highway was empty at this time, and there would be no one to help her. I looked up at the sky. The torn disk of the moon was serenely casting a bright light on the road. Buttman was not visible, and they are not found in our area. Not many people scream in the night, caught in the clutches of a merciless predator. Alas, such is the prose of life. Tomorrow they'll find a corpse of a young girl in the roadside bushes. And I haven't slept. I haven't sobered up yet. After last night's drunkenness, the operative will swear to himself. But look, the scene will start a criminal case, which will never solve another grouse. After a while, the girl's body will get to the cemetery, and the file with the case will eventually settle in the archives. I got out of the car. 2 big young men, dragging desperate highway patrolmen. A girl in a black SUV. She tried to scratch and bite, but a slap on the back of the SUV's right rear window was missing, and a light cigarette smoke was wafting from it. Finally, the guys rolled the woman up and carried her to the car. It was clear how this was all going to end. The thugs paid no attention to the blue Suzuki. Too small a bite could drive such a Kolimamaga. I headed leisurely toward the black car, hiding my baseball bat behind my back for the time being. And I was told it wouldn't come in handy. Oh yes, it is. The girl realized the situation had changed and started lashing out again. I got close to the participants in the crime drama. Apparently, In some subconscious way, the dashing fighters realized that the one who approached was not just a sucker. A beastly sense of danger had penetrated their uncluttered brains. "Let the girl go," I said firmly. As soon as the nearest thug tried to say something, I hit him in the face with a bat, without swinging. As instructor Petrenko taught, there was a characteristic crunch and the opponent fell on his side. The second one let the girl out of his hands and rushed at me. He tilted his head like a bull. I took a step to the side and with the knuckles of my fist, hit him in the temple. He collapsed on top of his coworker without a hitch. A car door slammed. A third character appeared, a pistol gleaming in the moonlight. I moved out of his line of sight, and in one leap I was next to him, tail on top of his Barrett, and pressed the magazine eject button. It was heard as it fell to the asphalt. At the same time, I turned on the safety flag. The subject who had not raised anything pressed the trigger time after time, but no shot was fired. I pulled the gun out of the poor guy's hands and with a palm strike on the codex, knocked him out. I bent over and lifted the magazine. There was silence. The girl had disappeared. A red shoe and purse lay on the pavement. I pulled out my knife and carefully slashed all 4 tires. Sharp honed tans easily opened the rubber, once again inspected the battlefield, and headed to my car. Shoved the trophy pistol under the seat. Just a moment, and I was already driving on the highway again. After 500 meters, I saw a girl with a limp, walking briskly in my direction. She didn't even know to hide in the roadside bushes. I pulled up beside her. "Get in." I opened the right front door. She looked at me stunned. "Get in, don't be afraid." They drove off. She stood silently for a while, then hesitantly climbed into the front seat. "Here." I handed her a bag and a shoe like yours. She silently took her things and clutched them to her chest. She didn't look in my direction. "Where are you going?" I asked the right question. To my amazement, she named my city. I smiled and increased my speed. As we pulled in, I knew her story. The girl's name was Kathy. 20 years old, father gone, mother alcoholic. Last year, Kathy finished school and came to the capital. She didn't get into university, tried to find a job, but couldn't. A friend offered to earn money with her body. A pimp showed up. They took her passport and let her get away with it. She's been at it for over a year. So far, the young one's a success. Then they'll put her on drugs and sell her to an underground brothel. In 3 years, she'll die of an overdose. It's a short story, but it's so real. Knifely was taken with a friend to a client tonight. He likes them young. The friend stayed, and she went home to the city I live in. Cab driver started harassing her, got his, and threw her out of the car. Then these 3 guys showed up in a black Lexus. I don't know how it would have ended if it wasn't for me. We got into town early in the morning. I dropped off my passenger at the address, a crumbling 1-story cinder block barracks. I drove home. On the way, I stopped by a convenience store and bought a bouquet of flowers, candy, and a bottle of champagne. There was an unfamiliar car in my parking space. Strange. I went up to my floor and opened the door to my apartment. I walked into the kitchen, put the bottle on the table, and headed for the bedroom. Trying not to make any noise, I opened the door. They lay cuddled together like newlyweds. Betty laid her head on his hairy chest and sang sweetly. Ideal. Sleeping next to her was me, or rather, my other self, my twin brother. He hadn't even covered himself with a blanket, exposing his junk. I went back to the kitchen and opened the champagne, then went back into the bedroom and started pouring the sweetness of the privates. Betty woke up, and when she saw me, she rolled off the bed, scooting into the corner. "Christopher, don't, I'm begging you." She didn't scream, she squealed. I'm breaking into a falsetto. Stephen, seeing me, smirked and without covering himself, got up and stretched. "You're early." I grabbed his throat with one hand. I just had to squeeze his fingers, and that was it. "You gonna kill me?" My brother had a cocky smile on his face. "She's been my woman for a long time. I'm just taking what's mine." I shifted my gaze to Betty. My wife grabbed her knees and went into a sobbing fit. I'm sorry. Like an incantation, she repeated. I only love you. I wish I knew what such love was called. Then it hit me. You've been together a long time. I looked at Betty enough to give birth to a son for her, Stephen answered. I felt like I'd been hit over the head with a sledgehammer by a son. Daima, isn't that my son? I suddenly began to choke. Everyone knows that but you. Stephen laughed. Let me go. He threw my arm away. My punch to the jaw lifted his body off the floor. Stephen flew across the wide bed and collapsed, hitting his head on the wall. Only his bare feet were sticking out of the bed. Betty was already calling someone on his cell phone from his corner. Get over here as soon as you can. Christopher's here. My first instinct was to get out of here as fast as I could. I couldn't be in the same room with these assholes, with a wife who'd been having an affair behind my back for nearly 5 years, and Stephen the bastard. I couldn't call him a brother. I didn't want to get into the philosophy of family relationships. I just had itchy fists. I even became afraid that I would just kill her first, and then this thing that had taken over the body of my favorite woman. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of vodka, which was in the refrigerator. I was going to drink it, but stopped and put the glass on the table. One should drink with joy, not with grief. Something told me I needed to stay sober, and this wouldn't be the last time. On this day, I was right. The front door slammed, and my parents came panting into the apartment. I sat in the kitchen and looked out the window, gathering what little strength I had left to calm myself down. My father came into the kitchen. Where's Stephen? What did you do to him? I expected all sorts of things, but not this kind of concern. Sebastian, Stephen is here. Mother's voice came from the bedroom. My father rushed into the bedroom, and there was a commotion. Apparently, they were bringing my wife's lover to his senses. I shook myself out of everything. I didn't care what happened next. I saw no sympathy for my father, only concern for the fate of his favorite son. He and my mother knew everything. Knowing full well about the bastard's connection to my wife, they knew about my son, knew and kept quiet, or worse, knew and supported him. I felt so disgusted I wanted to vomit. My machine began to calculate my next steps. The fact that my marriage was over was clear. The job was over too. I couldn't see that thing that used to be my brother every day. I had to move out of my apartment. It's a mess. Aside from my car, Betty quietly slipped into the kitchen. Christopher, it's your brother. I couldn't resist. You two look exactly alike. Dimka, you're not a stranger's nephew either. You won't leave us. Christopher, don't be silent. Betty grabbed my legs. Do you want to beat me? Not at my place. I was so squeamish I got up and went to the window. The sun had already risen, and its rays were bouncing off my wind-up car parked right under the window. I was finally able to pull myself together. The true reasons for my long business trips became clear. While I was away from home, at the business of the firm only had a break with my wife. My parents came into the kitchen. Christopher, don't make a tragedy out of what happened. We're one family, and we have to stick together. Dad started it. Don't make any rash decisions. I've already made my decision. I just have one question. You knew about everything. You knew the son wasn't mine. I spoke calmly, even casually. Not a muscle in my face quivered. The father was silent. Mother cried quietly. Everything was clear. It's Stephen, my favorite son. How could you deprive him of another toy? But Betty, why did she fall in love with me for money? Or did she fall in love so passionately that she decided to have another man's baby? Or just a woman's stupidity? I silently headed out into the hallway. My father tried to block my way. You're not going anywhere. He grabbed my sleeve. Take your hand away. He sensed something in my voice and quickly removed his hand. I'm leaving. Don't try to contact me. You don't have a second son. I never had one. I'm filing for divorce today. I looked at Betty and the paternity suit. Dimka has his own father. Let him raise him. He's your son. He loves you. You're not gonna leave him and me. I won't give you a divorce." Betty was hysterical. Dad slapped me on the cheek with the palm of his hand. "What are you talking about? Come to your senses. This is your wife and son." I grabbed him by the chest. The mother screamed, "Christopher, don't you dare. That's your father. If you touch me again, I'll beat you to it, you old bastard." I pushed my father away from my mother, grabbed my unopened bag, walked past the smirking Catholic standing in the bedroom doorway, and out onto the landing. "Christopher, don't go." Betty's hysterical scream was the last thing I heard before the door slammed shut. I was choking with rage. I stared blankly in front of me for a while. Then I started the engine and drove along the white lime-painted curb. Before my eyes stood a smirk, Stephen's whole face. With what pleasure I would have smeared his insolent face against the wall. But was it worth going to jail for? I guess not. I ended up alone with no wife, no son, no family, no job, and no place to live. Renewed, so to speak. What's up? I've got to find a place to live. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed the familiar number on the other end. It was answered very quickly. "Hello, it's the Elephant." I was driving the car with one hand and holding my cell phone in the other. "It's Christopher. I've got a minute." "Hello, Crank." To my army buddy, I was still Shatmanov. He was reluctant to call me by my first name. His habit used to annoy me a little. But now it's warmed my heart. I'm going to have to stay somewhere for a while again. I haven't decided whether to tell my friend about my troubles or not. I'm in trouble. I don't have a place to live yet. I see. The Elephant caught my thoughts on the fly. "Why don't you come to my place?" "There's a place here." Half an hour later, we were drinking fragrant tea in the kitchen. I categorically refused the offered food. After what I had been through, I couldn't eat a bite. My cell phone cried. Betty's name appeared on the screen. I disconnected the call. I had a fight with my wife. They'd poured me some hot tea. He asked with a wry grin. "It's much worse than that." I replied with a sigh. "Much worse." The Elephant fell silent, understandingly. He knew what worse meant. "Are you ready? We can go right now." My friend looked at the clock here, not far away in the private sector. Half an hour away. I didn't speed behind the Elephant's car. In fact, we hit a dirt road. And after 20 minutes, we pulled up to a small house standing in the back of a neglected lot. "It's an inheritance from my grandmother," the Elephant explained. "I don't know what to do with it. I'm sorry to sell it, and I don't have time to work on it. So far, I've set up a man's den here." "Come in, Elephant." He opened the lock on the gate and let me through, and a path barely visible in the grass led to the house. "Well, look." The Elephant opened the door hospitably. "Live as long as you want." He approached the cast iron one standing almost in the middle. There is wood, and the stove heats up very quickly, a couple of piles. And it's Tashkent here. You can walk around in your underwear. It's not cold yet. The Elephant opened the damper and looked inside the cast iron fireplace. "Anyway, I have to go to work. And you get settled. If anything, call me." He went out. And after a while, I heard the sound of a car pulling away. I went to get my bag, took out my jeans and t-shirt, hung them on the back of a chair. Let them hang them. They didn't fit in the bag. I looked around curiously. Inside the house was clean and cozy. The cabin itself was made of basic logs, and there was a persistent aroma of Smolensk pine in the room. The walls were not stapled, but simply chicken scrubbed and covered with colorless varnish. This gave them a noble matte shade. The ceiling was uncomplicatedly stapled, meticulously worked planks. All the wooden parts were made on conscience. It was evident that the cabin was built capitally and for a long time. The few pieces of furniture were old and almost antique. A folding sofa covered with a motley oriental rug stood against a blank wall. By the window itself was roughly boarded up from throws and boards. The table in the corner hummed old. I remember another Khrushchev refrigerator, a Dnepr. At the opposite wall stood a dam and a cabinet from the times of the Cult of Personality. On the floor was a thick palette, obviously handmade. On the thin carpet above the sofa hung several hunting knives, without sheaths, and an old rifle without a bolt, giving the whole place a hunter's charm. The sleepless night was taking its toll. I turned off my phone. Inundated with calls and texts from Betty, I covered myself with a blanket and fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was almost dark. I tried to remember the slipped-away dream, but my brain refused to obey me. All that was left was the longing gnawing at my insides. I looked in the refrigerator. I see. It would be weird if there was anything in there. I pulled on jeans, a tank top, sneakers, and threw a camouflage jacket over my head, put on my favorite black baseball cap without a visor, locked the front door, and headed for the car. It was already noticeably chilly. I closed the window and pressed the gas pedal. The car was rushing along the ring road. The torpedo slammed into the night air. I didn't know the neighborhood well and navigated by the glowing storefronts. The private sector was replaced by two-story barracks, built once for the workers of the furniture factory, some of which had lighted windows. At the end of the street, I saw the green window of a grocery store. I lurked with alcohol, took a couple of bottles of Dagestan brandy, 2 packs of dumplings, a couple of cans of dry potatoes, cucumbers, bread and some canned fish, and 2 dozen eggs. It seems to be enough for the first time. But how long would it last? This first time, I had no idea. At the checkout, I held out my card sleepily. The burly aunt swiped it several times on the terminal and looked at me disappointedly. "Access to the card is blocked," in a strained voice, she said. "Don't worry, I'll pay in cash." I held out the money, picked up the bags, and walked to the car. It made sense. Pops blocked my cards. What a bitch. I mean, it was my honestly earned money, my barely used paycheck. Good thing I cashed out almost half of it. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. Shit, I turned it off when the screen lit up again. A barrage of messages and missed calls rained down on me. Without reading, I deleted the garbage and drove home. To turn around, I had to drive to the end of the alley to the intersection. I had already turned left when my attention was caught by a commotion near the archway leading into the courtyard of a 2-story barracks. Against the wall of the house, 6 in a pile, stood a few stripped, frustrated girls and watched tensely as 2 guys methodically beat their nearly stripped colleague. One of them was holding the unfortunate prostitute by the hair, winding it around his arm for convenience. I rolled down the right window. The execution took place in silence. The guys were engaged in their usual business, bringing up their ward. The girl did not resist and obediently bore rather strong blows. She only moaned pitifully. She did not even try to escape from her tormentors. It's understandable. Occupational hazard. Pimps educate the contingent to interfere. The girl was no longer on her feet and collapsed under the lantern. For a moment, her bloody face was in the light. Her producers did not stop beating her. Only instead of using their fists, they started kicking. The victim was no longer moaning, but wheezing. Her face looked familiar. That's right. That's my nocturnal knocker. An associate, in fact. And scouts don't leave their own behind. I jumped out of the car with a baseball bat. "Hey, stop hitting her," I shouted, rapidly approaching the place of execution. One of the managers turned around, showing me his face. This is what I was waiting for. The impact crunch and thud of a fallen body. The second character reacted instantly and rushed into the back alley. But my rage was looking for an outlet, and I caught up with him in 2 jumps and hit him on the spine with the bat. The pimp collapsed under the leather. Such a blow makes the legs fail. The fallen man lay on the asphalt, drooling bloody drool and with taut lower limbs. I looked around. No help was needed. I carefully picked up the lying maiden and gently placed her on my shoulder, carried her, and put her in the car. She only looked at me with eyes frozen in a mute scream and moaned quietly. I turned around and drove home, avoiding the potholes. Kathy was lying on the couch, and I cut off her rags with a knife. When I saw the naked body, I shuddered involuntarily. There was one big bruise on her stomach. Her legs are bruised, and there are cuts on the inside of her thighs and epoch marks from extinguished cigarettes. His face is broken and swollen. What kind of brute would you have to be to abuse a woman like that? I gingerly felt her limbs and ribs. The girl was moaning normally. Looks like the bones are intact. But I'd already realized I couldn't do it. We can't take her to the hospital. Labila. She'll call the police right away. I dialed the elephant's number. Half an hour later, he arrived with a bearded man. Sam, a doctor. He introduced himself. Where's the body? That's his humor. The doctor gave her an anesthetic shot. Peroxide washed her wounds, bandaged her up. She's lucky. Her bones are intact, but she's in bad shape. This is a knife. He handed me a red packet. Give me 2 pills every 600 hours. Don't worry, your friend will pull through. I shook his hand and looked questioningly at the elephant. A molder. He caught my eye. I don't need anything. Robert has already paid me back. The elephant patted me on the shoulder, and he and the doctor left, and I moved the chair closer to the girl lying there and poured myself a glass of cognac. When I was a kid, I loved riding the railroad. I liked to look out the window, especially when the train was at the station. The station was always on the right as the train traveled, and on the left was the oncoming track. When a train was hitting it, it gave the impression that our train was moving and the oncoming train was standing. But once you looked to the right, the illusion of movement was gone. It reminded me of my family life. I kept looking to the left, mistaking the illusion of motion for truth. But in reality, my train was standing still, and in my so-called happiness, I never bothered to look to the right. It was only now that I began to realize that the situation was quite satisfactory and that she was losing face next to me on the pillow. One and the same. The rest was just a romantic adventure. The wife knew exactly what she was doing. She knew perfectly well that the baby would look like me anyway, so she gave herself to my brother with enthusiasm, with all her body and soul. At the same time, piously believing in family values, diligently imitating with me numerous orgasms, so that I did not suspect anything. My parents knew everything from the beginning. They were quite happy with the situation. Grandson, in any case, they're all the more from their favorite son of the hair. And I would be quite content with scraps from the bar's table. From the point of view of my parents and Betty, nothing egregious happened. A little embarrassment the horny husband found out, but he'll get over it and return to the family. We just have to wait. And they waited, blocking all my payment cards, thus leaving me without money, regularly sending a message and calling Betty. The content was familiar. I love you, I'm sorry, we'll have another son of yours. Then her mother joined her. It was trying to shame and push pity. It was hard to manipulate me. I cut them out of my life completely, cut off all ties. If they all, including not my son, fell through the ground, I would just shrug my shoulders and breathe a sigh of relief at being rid of those things. I didn't hesitate to file for divorce. Along with the paternity suit, the court ordered a genetic evaluation. No matter how much my family protested, calling me paranoid and scum. Bottom line, I'm not the father. You should have seen their disappointed faces. I wonder what they were hoping for. Then there was the trial. It was November and the frost was gripping my cheeks. We arrived at the hearing with an elephant. He had been patronizing me lately, trying to always be there for me. All these judicial adventures have simply got to me. The judge listened attentively to all the streams of lies and dirt that my former relatives diligently poured on me. When Stephen was given the floor, she perked up. A semblance of a smile appeared on her face. She kept shifting her gaze from him to me. The family's lawyer was jumping out of his pants in his closing argument, blaming me for everything that had happened. Then I was given the floor. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't want anything from them. I left everything. The former apartment, the car, left my father's company, and did not claim the inheritance. I didn't know my grandfather's position. He was abroad all this time, and did not seem to be interested in family problems. Finally, the judge announced the decision: divorce. No alimony for either son or wife. I am not the father. The judge also advised me to sue the father's company for severance pay from my earnings for the last month of employment. At this, she gave a very expressive look to my father, who even folded under her gaze. Hammer blow. And the elephant and I headed out. My car was parked in a parking lot about 500 meters from the courthouse. On the way, the elephant ran to the store to buy some brandy to celebrate his freedom. I was taking my time walking to the car when I heard it over my ear. Satisfied bastard. A hard blow from behind knocked me off my feet, and I fell forward, barely able to put my hands in front of me. I didn't realize what had happened. The toe of a shoe slammed into my face. My eyes went black, and I fell on my back. Stephen was leaning over me. "Next time, I'll kill you." He almost screamed as my father ran to pull him away from me, but my ex-brother managed to kick me in the side with his shoe. Betty came running toward me screaming. She knelt down and tried to lift my head to stop the blood coming out of my nose. "Honey, are you hurt?" I almost threw up at those words, and I quickly pulled myself together. It took me a second to get to my feet. I pushed away Betty, who had become a stranger, and turned to your brother out of the corner of my eye. I saw an elephant running across the street toward me. There was a crowd around us. Yeah, a lot of people were taking pictures on their phones. Stephen broke free from my father's grasp and lunged at me. That was his mistake. I met him with the back of my hand to his forehead. He froze for a moment, then collapsed like a leatherman at my feet. I didn't finish him off. Somebody in the crowd clapped. A police car pulled onto the lawn. They're right on time, as always. I'm on my way to the station in handcuffs. Stephen came to his senses and filed a report against me for brutal, gratuitous beating. All the family, except Betty and my ex-mother, confirmed it. But then the elephant appeared on the scene with the cell phone footage. Everything fell into place. I was swayed and offered to file a report on Stephen. But I spit under my feet and, accompanied by the elephant, went out. How did the tour of the station end for my ex-family? I don't know. The only thing I remember was my mother crying. Frozen with terror in her eyes. Was she starting to get it? Toward midnight, the cold began to make itself felt. It brazenly crept under the plate, or the hall of my bare heels with a cold tongue. I looked at the couch. The girl was sleeping quietly in a dream. I carefully adjusted the blanket, crawled down. Went outside. The full moon brightly illuminated the yard, then green color. I threw a few small ones on the curve of my arm. Pulled a shuck, added a couple of cracklings for the stack, and went back into the cabin. A few minutes later, the stove hummed. Nodding burning wood and filling the room with the smell of smoke, it immediately became cozy and warmer. I took cognac out of the refrigerator and poured myself another half glass. Immediately, I wanted to sleep. I sat down in an armchair and detached myself from the reality of where I was. I was awakened by Kathy's loud cry. "Don't worry, you're at a friend's house." I tried my best to calm the girl down. She flinched at my voice and tried to tuck her legs in. I guess she involuntarily caused the pain because she moaned loudly. She looked at me and tried to remember where she knew me from. "I gave you a ride into town last night. My name is Christopher. I met you. Remember, I spoke softly so I wouldn't scare her," and where she was afraid to phrase her question. "Your friends, they're gone and hopefully never will be again. You need to lie down for a while, and then you can leave if you want to." I handed her a leg. "Take a pill." Kathy looked at me. She looked like she was expecting another one of life's tricks, now in my face. "How did I get here?" "I brought you here. I'm kind of in charge of you now. Don't worry, just accept it. It's hard for me to explain the obvious to you." I smiled. "You hungry?" I put a skillet on the stove, and soon the room smelled of food. Kathy ate quickly, as if she was afraid I would take it away from her. I made tea from the elephant's supply, and having judged it beforehand, handed the cup to the girl. Then I helped her to the bathroom, and made her comfortable on the couch again, covered her with a blanket. Soon she fell asleep. In the evening, the elephant came and dropped off the groceries, reported the situation. No one is quiet in the city. I ran it through the guys. No one is looking for her. He nodded at the sleeping Kathy. A week later, Kathy started getting up. And after another 5 days, hiding her eyes, she asked if I could leave. Sure. No one's keeping you. Can you go right now? I turned away and continued peeling potatoes. I had a craving for fried potatoes, so I'll cook for myself and the elephant. I didn't care if the girl stayed or not. I'd say her leaving took away a lot of problems, so good riddance. Kathy stood in the middle of the room, covered with a sheet and holding the remains of her dress. I rummaged through my bag and pulled out my tracksuit. Take it. Day, can you take my jacket? Wait, I rummaged through my closet. On the bottom shelf were some old women's shoes. Maybe they'll fit. I put them in my clothes, and immediately I looked like a retired warrant officer. Do you want me to drive you or call a cab? Better a cab. And ours waved. Thank you. The cab came quickly. I didn't go to see Kathy off. She's not a little girl. It's hard to get a man out of shit, especially if they don't want to. Prostitutes come in many ways, not always forced. It's not my problem to raise her. You helped me out. You can't save everyone from here on out. A week after the divorce, my cards came back on. I got my last month's pay and severance pay. I was having more fun, but it couldn't last. I had to find a job at my father's company. The way was closed to me, as well as to other production facilities in our city. I tried several times to inquire about a job, but as soon as I heard my name, the personnel officers fell into a stupor and shut up, making it clear that the conversation was over. Only one manager of a small factory, smiling affectionately, advised to turn to Dr. Sebastian, I mean my father, and with him to solve the problem of employment. Anyway, my ex-family had me in a tight squeeze. In the end, the elephant managed to get me a job at a small car repair shop on a small salary. Its owner was too low-flying and didn't fall within the circle of interest of my ex-brother and his daddy. I didn't make any plans yet and was going to spend the winter at the elephant's house, and in the spring I was going to go to the east of the country in search of work. One late afternoon, there was a timid knock at the door. I looked at the wall clock. The first hour was a little late. Outside the door was her life from the cold. Kathy, may I come in? Come in. I shivered. The girl held a bag and was wearing my camouflage jacket. She walked to the stove and held out her aged palms. How's business? How's business? I said ironically. I'd like some tea. I handed her an aluminum mug, fresh over emergency almost black tea. Kathy drank the tea, trying not to look in my direction. There was a pause. Christopher, I might as well stay. She sighed heavily. What's wrong? You have a room, don't you? I put a candy bar in front of the guests and moved a stool. A neighbor has taken the room as a coffee table. He'll give it back if I get into bed with him. He says I'm not worthless. I've been living with a friend all this time. She's getting married, so she kicked me out. The girl looked at the fire in the stove. I have nowhere to go. The only thing left for me to do is to throw myself in the noose. Tears came out of her eyes. So you're talking about the rope. I grinned. She looked at me with a look that made me choke on my laughter. It was clear. You can stay. Except I have one room and a couch. One. You're against the wall. I'm on the edge. I'm spreading my arms. We'll figure something out later. In the morning, the elephant arrived. He wasn't surprised to see Kathy. Let's go and talk. He went out to the yard first. There's a job, but it pays well. It's a long way to Siberia. Today, we have to meet the customer. Preliminarily, I was told that the work will be on the Army specialty. The elephant shook his lips. A hot spot, huh? Dealing with corrupt politicians. I was disappointed. It looks like something else. We'll see on the spot. The elephant grinned. We can always say no. Where do we meet? At the Troika restaurant. They'll come to us. The elephant went to the car. Get in. Let's go. I went back for my jacket. I nodded to Kathy and followed the elephant. In a restaurant with a dubious reputation, there weren't many people at this time. A couple of people at the window were getting healthy. And me and the elephant. After a while, a man came to our table and, without asking permission, sat down across from us. His whole appearance emphasized solidity, and at the same time he resembled a cobra preparing a goose for a throw. Ex-military, a special forces man, perhaps. Invisible vibes of danger mixed with the scent of expensive perfume. Fog, sharks, or our table completed the image. Stylish gray suit with a small checkered pattern, worn over a blue shirt with no tie. An insanely expensive Swiss watch and a platinum ring. On the ring finger of his left hand, exactly the kind of ring a confident man should wear, a successful man. My name is Robert. He began without preamble. I take it this is the man you were talking about. The elephant nodded. Let's get right to the point. Do you know who I represent? The master is getting married. At that, our interlocutor smiled and is about to retire, handing over his business to his daughter. He recalled her from London and began to familiarize her with the business. For this purpose, he sent her to eastern Siberia to the gold mines. Nellie flew safely to the place, settled in a hotel, and disappeared. She didn't contact him for a week. Naturally, the owner got worried. We'd managed to find out that Nellie was kidnapped by local scumbags, not for ransom, but mainly for sexual pleasures. He's holding her in the taiga at a ranch. We know the place. Robert ran his hand over his face as if to relieve fatigue. We need to get her back. We've got to clean everybody out first. You know what I mean. Unfortunately, we don't have specialists of your caliber. Is that why I'm here? What's the price? The elephant has spoken. $5,000 each now and 10 after the issue is resolved. 20. And you can do whatever you want with us. In the words of a movie character, the elephant replied, Agreed. The man nodded. When do we leave? Elephant took a sip of coffee that had already cooled down. Yesterday, do not take anything with you. You will get everything on the spot. You'll be met and given a guide. Here's the money. Robert looked at me too closely and pushed 2 envelopes in our direction. A car will pick you up in 2 o'clock. He stood up and, without saying goodbye, headed for the exit. He was quickly followed by 2 drunkards sitting by the window. We're going away for a while. You'll stay in charge. Kathy shuddered. Do you drive a car? She nodded. I put the keys on the stool. Take mine. They're gonna ask about us. If they do, you don't know anything. They just disappeared, that's all. I instructed my apartment. I'll leave you the money. I put 1,000 Baku rubles next to the keys. That'll be enough until we get back. But I have to go. I picked up my bag and headed for the door. Christopher, wait. The girl came right up to me. You just come back. You hear? Please come back. She threw her arms around me and snuggled into me for a second. I could taste the kiss on her lips. In her eyes, I could see more than just the sadness of parting. It all happened very quickly. I came to my senses when she made me see her off like that for the first time in my life. We got there without adventure. From the airport, we were taken to a local club. Misleadingly referred to as a hotel, we dropped our bags and went for shells. Robert wasn't lying. We were picked up winter camouflage, white robes, wide taiga skis. We took 2 Kalashnikov assault rifles with a silencer, a Stetkin pistol, a couple of tactical backpacks, complete with an unloader, winter boots, gloves. In general, everything that could come in handy in the taiga. In violation of the instructions, I even managed to run through the local market from Samalki. I bought an antique stiletto for a ridiculous amount of money. In disgraced camouflage torn jeans, a perfect weapon in close combat. What brings him to this neck of the woods? Hard to imagine. We managed to sleep for 3 hours. How? A protective colored UAZ truck came to pick us up. We drove about 160 kilometers. Then we turned onto a country road. After 30 kilometers, the car stopped on its own. The driver helped us take things out of the trunk, turned the UAZ and left the Taiga on skis. A man in a warm jacket with a rifle over his shoulder came out. "This man, your guide." He introduced himself. I nodded. The elephant and I jumped around a bit. Our shell made no noise. We skied and followed each other with the guide away from the road into the thicket. The night was frosty. Already habitually fastened skis, we trampled a track along the snowfield in the Taiga. There was a ringing silence. It was as if she was asleep. It was covered with icicles and hoarfrost. In the clear night sky hung a full green-blue moon, illuminating the forest. So clearly each tree stood out, and the number of stars was innumerable. You could pick needles. We had been walking for many hours through these wild places, carefully avoiding the trampled paths of hunters. If my heart were calmer, I could blissfully admire the beauty of the night. But my knees were dying from fatigue, and sticky, salty sweat was pouring down my face. I took a gulp of saliva, fixed my backpack, pulled the belt of my automatic rifle, and continued on my way, trying not to lose the back of the guide in the darkness. Gathering on the road, the elephant and I took with us only the essentials, some dry rations, matches, and a few horns with ammunition. On my belt, I had a tactical knife stiletto, bought recently at the flea market. I strapped it to my right hip. Its camouflage, torn sheath blended in with the color of my pants. It was almost impossible to see it there. It's a great thing for people who understand. We're supposed to reach our target just before dawn. Well, calculations are calculations, and we had to walk by panic of my wife, snow-covered virgin, and fatigue by the middle of the night had already piled up a lot. And at dawn, there is still the main work to be done. Having thrown us in these hours to stop is impossible. We got into the rhythm of movement, and any stop could throw off the breath and relax. It's a pleasure to stomp through the Taiga at night. God forbid you move your leg or break anything. You can't get out of the Taiga by yourself. How many people died like that, went into the Taiga and never came back? I rhythmically moved my feet, helping myself with sticks, trying to breathe in time with the movement. The terrain was mostly flat, though a few times I had to roll down some low slides. But that was all right. We should be there soon. And by my calculations, it wasn't far now. Suddenly, I felt someone's unkind gaze on me. I even flinched. He's not slowing down. I looked around. No one. Was it just me? I'm used to trusting my senses, or should I say instinct. That animal, subconscious sense of impending danger. It's never failed me in war or in everyday life. So there is something or someone here. I turned around. The elephant was methodically swinging his ski poles and following me along the trampled track. I wondered what I had imagined. Maybe it was a rogue bear. I didn't want it on my head. I switched to light running, trying to keep a close eye on the road and the sides, just in case I took the safety off the automatic rifle. The cartridge was in the cartridge, so in case of what there is something to meet. Suddenly, the guide stopped and raised his hand. I cautiously drove up and stopped beside him. "There is someone here," the alien hunter said quietly. "He's watching us. Should we attack or something?" I was breathing hard. I was tired of civilian life. I don't know. If he wanted to, he would have attacked us long ago. I smelled him 200 hours ago. He's coming from our right about 100 meters away. I cautiously looked in that direction, but I didn't see anything. I looked back and looked at the elephant crouching with the machine gun. "What are we going to do?" quietly asked the guide. "Do the job." I looked expressively at the machine. "Let's go." It was time to show the hut, but there was a forest all around, and there was no sign of habitation. Suddenly, it seemed to me that the frightened guide had lost his way, but he stopped and waved to me. "It's gonna be the edge. We're at the target. You're on your own from here. You got a map. You'll reach the point on your own." The guide turned his skis around. Good luck. Aren't you afraid? Alone. I've been in the Tavis since I was a kid. The man shrugged his shoulders and, without looking back, walked along the trampled track in the opposite direction. Soon his back, illuminating mine with moonlight, disappeared behind the trees. In about an hour it should be dawn, but the moon seemed to shine even brighter. For our expedition, such weather is worse than the worst enemy. I'd rather have fog and snow, but such was our luck. The elephant has arrived. Well, Commander, we start quietly, he said and adjusted the belt of the machine gun. We slid toward the lodge, hiding in the shadows of the trees, trying to keep Luna to our left so that our shadows merged with the solid wall of the forest. At last I saw at the opposite edge of the clearing Belevskaya in the moonlight a long structure enclosed by a fence of reflex sheets-based iron. The two windows facing the edge of the forest, where the elephant and I lurked, were dark. Almost closely adjoining the house was a barn made of logs, and farther away in a special area, barely covered with snow, was dark. The historical monster of thunder was a helicopter, sabers, blades. On the side opposite the house, there were several tanks, probably with fuel for the helicopter. Somewhere nearby an engine clattered, generating electricity. At the entrance to the lodge it dimmed. An uneven blue-colored flashlight came running. I pulled my night binoculars out of my unloading and brought them up to my eyes. There didn't seem to be any dogs. We started off as if we were on a roll. I felt a familiar shiver run down my spine. The feeling of the last seconds before the attack, when it is impossible to stop, as it is impossible to stop a snow avalanche that has begun its movement. Without turning his head, he waved his hand, and in perfect silence, the figure in a white coat zigzagged towards the fence. In a few seconds, the elephant was already on the other side and took up a position at the side wall, holding the entrance in his sights. I overcame the obstacles in one leap and stood close to the door, put my palm on the handle, and gently pulled the door towards me. It moved towards me and stopped, as if it was bumped into something. I see. With the usual hook, holding the automatic behind my left hand with my right, I pulled out a knife and slipped the blade into the slot. Lightly pressed upward, pulled at the door toward me, and slowly lowered the hook so it wouldn't yank open. Carefully, he opened the door. Silence from the cabin smelled of lodging, onions, stew, gun grease. Behind me, an elephant crept through the doorway. Just in case of fear and me on tiptoe, I slipped inside, moving quickly and silently, putting soul by soul, judging by the life-affirming ramp up to the wearer. Musa from behind the closed door leading to a side room. Two natives were sound asleep. I slid like a shadow along the wall without taking my finger off the trigger. Where is the third? And the prisoner? As if answering my mute question from behind the other door, I heard a characteristic slapping and a loud, prolonged groan. I gently pushed the door open and peered through the crack. A big male was grooming a woman on all fours. Well done. With such fervor that she occasionally hit her head on the headboard of the bed. Good thing there was a mat hanging there. Softened the blows I could clearly see in the darkness rhythmically moving white in the ass of the man. There was an example of the most tender intergender friendship inherent in a partner who understood each other well. It didn't look like the damsel from To Her Bow. Not willingly, I let him live for a second, and then I pulled out, stellet, and put it to the hilt between the ribs right in the heart through my body. Like a discharge of electric current ran inexpressible sensation, transmitting itself to the enemy along with the impact of the knife. The moment when the man you killed leaves the life, and it's as if you see his flying soul. I felt like an angel of death for a moment. The male silently fell face down on the maiden. She had already opened her mouth to scream, but I had time to put my glove in it. The maiden fell silent, spinning her eyes frantically. Behind my back, the elephant's automaton clicked softly twice. For a moment about the light in the corridor, not bright flashes. Two bodies returned to the beds and froze, convulsing, clearly emphasizing the feat in a fading rhythm. Illuminated by the full moon, the Tega froze in a light stupor in the silvery moonlight. Dimly cast white coats, tall pines. I pressed the two tangent 3 times. The radio station quietly took a chance. The signal was received. Half an hour later, I heard the approaching rumble of a helicopter. The elephant had pulled onto the porch, a bound maiden. She was lunging, trying to say something and trying with all her might to spit out my glove sticking out of her mouth. Maybe he'll untie her, the hardy elephant said doubtfully. So that she bites us no more, or what? We'll turn her in, Daddy. Let her deal with it. We've done our job. I and the elephant picked up the girl under the arms and dragged toward helicopter. The pilot keeps the engine running, and the propeller blades revolved, raising a blizzard of snow. Take it, I shouted to the chief of security, standing on the top step of the gangway. He stretched out his hand and pulled the girl inside the car. I put the machine gun behind my back and started to climb up the ramp. Robert shouted something from behind my back, and a shot rang out very loudly. I was hit in the shoulders with a sledgehammer, and the light went out. Consciousness came back in pieces. First I felt my legs, then my arms, then a piercing cold. When I lifted my eyelids, a blinding white light, bright and sharp as an awl, struck my eyes. I blinked a few times. I could see nothing. Recent events pulled out of memory: Zanka girl, a helicopter, and a shot in the back, something behind the rustle and the side. Are you awake? The elephant had no choice of words as usual. What was that? I spoke slowly. I wasn't fully awake yet. It was a cleanup job. First us, and then us. The elephant spit. Honestly, I don't understand it myself. Who did the shooting? There's one thing that's been bothering me so far. Yeah, our guide was buried in a snowdrift, waiting for a command. He hit your backpack, and there's a titanium plate in there, if you need anything. Elephant wiped his face with the palm of his hand. You got thrown off the ramp, and you're like this. While he was shooting at you, I cut him off with my machine gun. Too bad, I missed the bastard large enough. He managed to run over the door. The elephant smiled, but I'll get him too. I lay there, afraid to move. The pain in my back throbbed and jolted by the metal butt of the machine gun. It pressed painfully on my ribs. The assault rifle ended up under my stomach. Slowly, the ability to think returned. True, there were not much thoughts in my head. Everything was clear. We were screwed. And it had been planned from the beginning. But now the main question in my mind was how to get out of here. How long had I been unconscious? I turned on my side and tried to pull out the machine gun for about half an hour. The elephant tried to help me, and the chopper flew right away. Almost immediately made a circle and went northeast. Right. Flew to Hutton. I finally got my gun out. We gotta get out of here as fast as we can. As if they heard my words in the distance, a wolf howl, long and dreary. The forest sanitation workers are coming, the elephant snorted. I did not share his amusement. Nonsense. If anything, I've stayed at the camp. The walls are strong there, the elephant said cheerfully. I don't think so. They'll come back, especially since they know you're alive. Why do they need witnesses? I was going for the worst-case scenario. Out of the woods, there was the growing rumble of a helicopter engine. Above the tops of the pine trees, the wing propeller and the machine appeared. The helicopter swept over the clearing and went for a second circle. In white coats, we were invisible from above, and it inspired hope. The helicopter showed itself again, and I saw a rocket break off from its console and rush downward, leaving a blue trail behind it. It hit right in the middle of the cabin. There was a burst of flame, and then an explosion. We were covered in heat and hit by a blast wave. As if on cue, we dropped our heads into the snow as we came to our senses. The rumble of the helicopter came from far away. Well, everything was finally cleaned up. I looked toward the cabin. The cabin was burning. Clouds of blue smoke were rising above the taiga. A little later, the fuel tanks burst. Those bitches. The elephant cursed. Yes, they work competently. All the more reason to do so. After waiting about 10 minutes and making sure the helicopter was finally gone, I got to my feet. I shook myself out of a decent amount of snow. Get up. Let's see if there's anything left. I hung the automatic rifle on my chest and headed towards the bush. Slightly afraid, putting the machine gun in front of me, I walked towards the huge campfire. A head still heavy. Forest, trees, fears, howling. Snow dust was pulled by the sharp smell of burning. Inflamed wood resin, rubber, something else rather synthetic. Ahead of them lay a few dead trees. The heat of the fire hit me in the face. At the sight of the winter house, a heap of burning logs, a rubble fence. I walked another 50 meters, gradually slowing my step. I couldn't get closer. I could not let the heat from the fire. The fire was still blazing in full force. I stopped next to it. The elephant was breathing heavily. The situation was changing like in a kaleidoscope of actions of our enemies. And these are definitely enemies impossible to guess. It would be good if they thought we were dead. But who can predict what the enemy is thinking? What do? The elephant, the life-loving one, has spoken. We have to go. I pulled out a map. The nearest village is 80 kilometers away. It'll take 2 days to ski across the virgin land. And we have water all around us. I pointed to the snow. But what about the wolves? Suddenly, I felt the prickly stare again. My heart treacherously fluttered. Again, we seemed to be being watched. I looked at the elephant. Don't you feel anything? My partner lifted his chin. As if there was something in the air uncertainly, he muttered. We need to find the skis. I turned my head. And suddenly I saw what I should have seen immediately. About 150 meters away from the fire, a small helicopter stood by the forest itself. Of course, it could have been destroyed by the explosion, but it's worth a try. It's a sin not to take such a chance, especially the only one. I turned to the elephant, but he was staring at something on the opposite side of the glade. Look, he said in a breathy voice. I put the binoculars to my eyes. At the very edge of the forest, without hiding, there stood a lone figure, resembling a human, exactly resembling a pair of neck with black hair, moving on 2 legs. It walked slowly in our direction. Instead of a human head, she had the head of a bear on her shoulders, or something like that. The beast walked slowly toward us, as if it realized we had nowhere to go. A cold dread began to creep into my soul. My legs felt like absorbent cotton, and a foreign voice sounded in my head. There's nowhere to go. There was only death ahead. I looked at the elephant, who was silently staring at the approaching monster. Saliva was coming out of his half-open mouth. He's a degenerate. From this thought, I came to my senses, grabbed my partner by the collar of his jacket, and dragged him to the helicopter. The helicopter was intact. I saw it from a distance. What happened next was a poker game. Is there fuel in the tank? If so, how much? I kicked the elephant inside and climbed in myself. The elephant came to his senses and looked at me with a meaningful look. He said, "We need a silencer now," and pulled the bolt. Too bad the caliber is too small. Well, sorry, no grenade launcher. I've been tinkering with the dashboard. I've never seen a helicopter like this before, but all machines like this have the same controls. Give me the ignition key, and I'll need one. I took a quick look at the instruments, everything familiar. All in all, no surprises, some things I've never seen before. On this model, I have not practiced, but all the improvements of the 3rd degree, reading a prayer to myself, reached for the right ones. The toggle switch started the engine, the twin screws with the glowing gunpowder spinning at idle. Need to extend it at least a little. Looked at the fuel gauge. Looks like there's half a tank. Increased the revs, and the engine started howling and buckled up. I yelled to the elephant. At that moment, right in front of my face came a glowing face. It was a strange, incredible creature. Most of all, it looked like a monster from my nightmarish dreams. It resembled half bear, half monkey with a large head remotely resembling a bear's. It was covered from its huge, angular head to its heels with gray-black fur that was not long, thick, and dense. V. At the open mouth, wetly knotted self and pianist saliva. Dense rows of even sharp-pointed fangs. In the short fur solidly cover the muzzle under the wary standing triangular ears. Burning with inhuman malice. Deep-set scarlet eyes with vertically set yellow badges. Its roar was audible even in the cockpit, despite the engine running. I lifted the car into the air. The helicopter pecked a few times. Nodes wobbled, but obediently gained altitude. I looked down. The creatures were raging there, having lost their prey. I raised the helicopter another 5 meters, added Gaza, and headed northwest towards the village of Razdolnoy. "And how long have you been flying helicopters?" Slan gave a voice. "You won't believe it, I'm flying for the first time." The man put his elbows on the table and looked attentively at his interlocutor. "I ask you again, Sebastian, where is Christopher?" Sebastian felt like he was being interrogated. He felt as if his father could see right through him. "Dad, I haven't seen him in a long time. Right after the divorce, he disappeared." "Disappeared? Did you go looking for him?" The owner of one of the largest steel companies in the country shook his head incredulously. "Why did they divorce?" "Christopher, for some reason, decided that Stephen had slept with his wife. So he made a scandal of it." Sebastian looked uncertainly at his youngest son. For some reason, he decided out of the blue. John grinned, but his grin was cold. "And then he got divorced and disappeared. There must be a good reason for a man to go to such drastic measures. I know my grandson. He doesn't make too hasty decisions." Grandfather grumbled. "John, you mustn't worry." The young woman standing behind the chair put a hand on the man's shoulder. Grandfather affectionately covered her palm with his, instantly drawing a disgruntled grimace from his son. "All right, it's all clear to me. Sit in the hallway." Grandfather turned to the young man frozen at the window and said, "Call my daughter-in-law." A still quite young woman entered the office. She walked uncertainly to the long desk. "Hello, Emily. Have a seat. Would you like some tea or coffee? Have you had any breakfast today?" The old man's eyes shone with love. It was clear that he loved his daughter-in-law and showed her no ostentatious respect. "Hello, Daddy." Emily looked warily at Emily's father-in-law. "What's wrong?" "While I was away. Why did Christopher leave the family?" Emily cried. "He accused Betty of adultery and of having a son by another man." "Why did he think that?" Grandfather frowned. "He caught Betty's table in bed." Emily covered her face with her hands, beat up Stephen, and left. Beaten up by Stephen. Also fabulously lucky. I would have killed standing behind the chair. The woman soothingly stroked her grandfather's shoulder. "Where can Christopher be now?" "He was at the trial with his army friend. His name is Elephant, I think. Maybe he's at his place now." The old man hesitated. Camille ordered. He raised his head and looked at the young woman. "It will be done, John." She wrote something down in a notebook. "Emily." Grandpa smiled. "I'll take you to the restaurant for lunch and we'll talk." He got up from his chair, showing that the formal part was over. "In my time, I took everything from the Army service, even the ability to drive a helicopter. It may have been a little tricky, but it was the skill that saved our lives today." Down below was a solid, blurry green-white mass. The weather began to deteriorate from above. Sullen gray clouds loomed overhead. I made a slight turn, touched the wheel. The helicopter tilted. It seemed that the gray sky dropped lower, threatening to pin the car to the ground. I put on my headphones and turned on the onboard radio. Nothing could be heard in the headphones but a crackling noise. The helicopter shook. An air pocket. Heart froze for a moment. Fell into my stomach. Nearby, an elephant was swearing. A jolt began, but soon stopped. I estimated that we had already flown most of the distance to our target. I looked at the gauges. We were almost out of fuel. We'd have to land soon. I looked down. A sea of green pine needles. Ahead showed mountains shrouded in snow and horns on the slopes and trees. I took the car higher. The haze around me was thickening, but I had to climb up far beyond all the instruments. I knew how to use them. It wasn't about finesse. You fly. You don't fall down, that's fine. I think I've had enough of climbing above the clouds. I switched back to horizontal flight. The helicopter shook. Squeezing the levers, I leveled the machine. We were on the same course. I was absorbed in maneuvering. Practically did not look at the instrument panel. I still didn't understand the position of some of the arrows of some instruments. The helicopter was flying over the Green Taiga again, a gray thread of the frozen wide Svura River with a compass flashed where white patches of birch trees broke through. I realized that I had not so much deviated from the intended course in 10 West no more. I wiped my face wet with sweat with the sleeve of my robe mask, and a red light on the dashboard was freezing, indicating that the fuel was left for 10 minutes. I began to descend, looking for a place to land. The Taiga was a solid dark green carpet. Finally, I saw the white one about Galena. I made a circle and came in, started manipulating the levers again. The helicopter lay there. Every now and then it fell into weightlessness. Finally, the machine went down responsibly. The landing was not very soft. The helicopter perceptibly bumped the angry ground. The rotating blades raised around a small snowstorm. Finally, the engine shut down and there was silence. I pulled out the map and tried to determine our location to Razdolnoy. It was about 20 kilometers, but we had to walk them even without skis. We crawled out of the cabin and looked. The river was somewhere on the right, about 2 kilometers away from the village, so we decided to walk along the frozen bed. I fixed the strap of my backpack and stepped towards the river. Following me, holding the automatic rifle at the ready, moved Elephant after each other. We walked through unfamiliar terrain, vaguely realizing where we were going. Finally, we came to the shore. The time was already rolling towards evening, and to all appearances, it would soon begin to get dark. Winter days are short. We had to think about sleeping and look for a suitable place. But there was no suitable place. Suddenly, almost at the very shore, among the tall larches I saw a wooden hut. It was so black from time that at first I took it for a big boulder. We came closer. The hut had once been pancaked from thick larch trunks. It was certainly a winter hut. Only long abandoned from time, the hut was almost window to window in the snow. In some places the roof was damaged. The windows still kept their panes intact, but were boarded up. The door, oddly enough, was intact. I gingerly pulled the leather handle on the door toward me, clinging to the icing. The low threshold reluctantly crept open, exposing a dark doorway. Holding our weapons at the ready, we stepped into the darkness and stopped in confusion. Inside the hut was darkness. Our eyes fell out. Digging in my backpack, I took a flashlight and pressed the button and involuntarily took a step back. Right in front of us at arm's length, the flashlight illuminated a tine-yellowed human skull, exposing rare crooked teeth from beneath a fur cap and a smile. Braids of long gray hair fell over his shoulders. It was clear that the inhabitant of the Zinmovie was long and reliably dead by the color of the flashlight. I watched the skeleton from all sides. Apparently, when alive it was a man on a garment of leather and dense fabric. Decorated with a long limp were sewn several figures in the form of fantastic beasts. In his right hand, the skeleton firmly held an ancient KP strong gun with a long, living through the barrel. The left hand had fallen off and lay next to the skeleton. Clutching with his fingers a small axe, similar to an Indian tomahawk, a homemade knife with a long rusty blade, and a handle carved from bone was lying on the side. Beside the knife something gleamed, reflecting the light of the flashlight, a ring. It was very old and seemed to be made of silver. Not really looking at the find, I quickly put it in the breast pocket of my jacket. Without saying anything to the elephant, I walked around the skeleton and shone the flashlight, started to examine the room. On the left near the wall sheltered bunks, open with lice skins. Above them, hooked on a rusty nail, hung a tambourine with tied copper cuvins. In the far corner was a stove built of wild stone. It looked to be in good working order. Near the stove lay a neatly stacked supply of dry wood. Near the window there was a table, boarded up from new boards. Everything was as it should be in a hut. I turned around and the elephant, not letting go of the automatic rifle, froze on the threshold. Obviously, he was not going to spend the night with this monster under one roof. Meanwhile, it was already getting dark. Gloomy clouds rolled the sky tightly. Spreading fine snow, I took out of my backpack a candle and a lighter, taked it to the table, lit it, and the room lit up with a bright light that gave it a semblance of coziness. Elephant took out of his backpack a piece of the presentation divided on the floor and neatly folded the remains. They took them out of the hut, intending to bury them in the morning. I built a fire in the stove. I estimated that there would be enough wood for the morning. I started laying things out one by one, taking them out of my backpack. The elephant opened with a knife and put cans of stew and porridge on the stove. Old nails were hammered into the wall of the hut. On them we hung jackets and weapons. The aroma of stew had already diffused through the room. Well familiar to all those who served in the army, I moved 2 roughly fabulous stools to the table. No plates. We'll have to eat directly from the cans. Carefully put the hot cans on the table and took out an aluminum spoon. At the same time, the elephant took out bread with a knife. I looked at him with a special look, a look only an old soldier can understand. May I? His eyes told me. I stuck my hand into my backpack, took out an army flask with alcohol, and rubbed the mug of flag la rotted and its edge. And soon the fiery water poured down his throat. Followed by me too, I applied myself to the drink of the gods, quickly chugging it down with key water from the other flaga. The elephant even stopped chewing, watching the process intently. Don't forget to exhale. The commander gallantly wiped off the regulars of the social parlors. My partner advised me. As Comrade Stalin said, life has become more cheerful. The elephant and I got more and began to get ready for bed. I paddled out of the hide and threw them outside on the bunk. Settled the staff, neck, jacket, putting my backpack under my head. The bed was ready. We decided to sleep by turns, dividing the night into watches. The night was restless. Several times I heard strange sounds outside. Every now and then there was a mumbling outside the windows, sometimes a wolf-like howl, accompanied by the banging of a tambourine. Anxiety grew rapidly in my chest. In the morning, slowly leave this place, Vad, this place is ruined. I did not wake up the elephant and sat up all night clutching my rifle. Toward morning, the strange sounds stopped. There was an ominous silence. It was still dark when I woke the elephant. We have to get out of here, I whispered, putting on my backpack. There was no time for explanations. I took my automatic rifle, taking the safety off. The elephant looked at me understandingly, without asking questions. We need to go down to the river and then follow the river. There is less snow there than on the bank. I whispered in the elephant's ear, as if I was afraid that someone would hear me. You go first. I'll cover everybody out. I pulled back the heavy bolt, opened the door and froze. Opposite the hut, with its back to the river, stood the blurred morning poem of the corners. A black cash register, a figure in front with empty eye sockets. In a bony fist clutched the handle of a knife with a bloody blade. A wave of animal fear swept through my entire body. Instinctively, I raised my automatic rifle and with a short burst slashed at the creepy creature. To my amazement, I saw that the shots had no effect. The bullets had hit the target. I saw it clearly, but the figure did not even sway. It continued to stand still and stare at us silently, as if I had fired blanks. Finally, the figure took a step back. Its outlines gradually began to blur, and soon it disappeared, as if it had vanished into thin air. For some time, we stood like a halt, afraid to move. Why are we standing there? I hissed, coming to my senses. Let's go. We moved down the path with a quick step. When I left this strange place, I had to find a way down to the river. I followed behind, looking carefully around. At some point, I began to think that we were not alone. Someone was following in our footsteps. I'm not a great tracker, but I noticed the bushes trembling, crackling, twigs behind us. Sometimes there was a blurred shadow among the trees. I had the impression that the pursuers were not particularly lurking. We were already dying in the frozen swamps. When a terrible howl sounded ahead, we were deliberately pressed close to the swamp. Cutting off escape routes, we switched to running, trying to break through to the river. I had already seen the cliff when from somewhere on the side of the thorny shrubbery covered with snow, a gray shadow rushed at me. The sound, machine gun bursts, cut the silence. It did not reach me. A huge wolf leaped away. It was unclear if it had hit or not. A shadow flashed again. I fired without aiming. It squealed pitifully. At that moment, I saw something black and shaggy coming from my left. I held my breath. I fired again. The beast buried its head in the snow. There's the cliff. And that's when they came at me from behind. Yeah, I didn't see that coming. I could hear the beast's stinking breath on the back of my neck. The wolf tried to grab me by the neck with its teeth, but it was prevented by a thick fur collar. It was impossible to use a machine gun in this situation. I threw away the now useless weapon and tried to pull out my knife, frantically fumbling around my belt, but could not find the hilt. The teeth of the beast were inevitably approaching my neck, and that's when I remembered the stiletto. Wrenched it from its sheath on my hip and stabbed it back with all my might, from the bottom to the top. It hit us squarely between the ribs, and we collapsed to the ground. The wolf wheezed. His grip loosened, and I struggled to get out from under the carcass. He was still twitching for mushrooms, clawing at the snow. But it was clear he didn't have long to live. I feared another attack, so I did not hesitate to cut his throat. At that moment, an elephant ran up to me in a bush coat with a torn-off sleeve. But since he was breathing heavily, it looked like he had gotten it too. I picked up the automatic rifle and wiped it with my glove on the snow. A vague thought was going through my head, and then it came to me. Wolves. They're so smart. For an ordinary animal. And they were hunting us by the book. There was a barely audible rustle. A new character appeared in the clearing. Stepping out of the shadows of the trees, the red corners of its eyes glared at us. A huge wolf stared intently. The white light of the rising sun was building on his pelt, and it seemed as if the fur was cast with silver. My finger rested on the trigger, but the wolf didn't attack. He stood for a while longer, and then turned leisurely and seemed to disappear into the taiga. We were still standing with the elephant, breathing heavily, trying to collect ourselves after the fight, as a ringing dog barking was heard from the river. 3 surrounded Nart, mated with dogs, were passing us along the frozen river towards Razdolnoy. I raised my automatic rifle and fired several times into the air. By evening, we were in Razdolnoy. The next day, a hitchhiking timber truck delivered us with the elephant to the district center, from where we flew to the capital of the region in an old N2 called by the people as a corncob. Our native city met us with snowfall and cold wind. Despite the bad weather, everything around spoke about the imminent coming of the new year. Multicolored lights on artificial Christmas trees shone festively. Temptingly, new lights of advertisements were burning. People hurried to buy gifts for their relatives and food for the New Year's table. It is said that one should never leave the year unfinished. My elephant, and I knew this tradition well, and decided to find a customer for our Taiga Odyssey. We pushed the automata back to Razdolnoy. A local amateur bought them for a good price. With this money, we were able to buy tickets home. Everything else, including the knives, we managed to spend in our luggage. There was even enough for a cab from the airport to our temporary haven. I got there when it was already dark. The lot was snowed in, and there were no tracks to the house in sight. I ballooned over the door. The key was in place. Soon the stove was humming merrily. I made myself whatever dinner I could from what I found in the refrigerator and sat down in a chair opposite the stove. Kathy was gone. Judging by the fact that there weren't any of her things in the room, she'd been gone quite a while, probably right after we broke up. Was I upset? It was a little sad that nothing is permanent in my life. Sooner or later things leave me. So Kathy left too. I poured some vodka and pulled out a classic pickle from the bathhouse. Well, be well. Suddenly I remembered my find in the abandoned ranch. I took the trophy ring out of my jacket pocket and carefully placed it on my palm, trying to determine its weight. It was clearly a man's ring. In the old days, silver was always considered a masculine metal, unlike gold, a feminine metal. I turned on the table lamp and scrutinized the ring. It was a solid ring, no special frills. An equilateral cross in a circle, obviously without religious connotations. In the center of the cross is a convex circle, similar to the urban. Between the crossbars of the cross is poured in places by sections of time black and red enamel. In general, it all looked very much like a shield. Most likely, it was some symbol, the meaning of which I was not destined to understand. I moved the ring away from my eyes. It looks beautiful. Will I ever find out how this ring ended up in the hut? Who made it and to whom it belonged? I don't think it was the man whose remains we found. This ring doesn't match his supposed appearance. But who knows? Looks can be deceiving. I couldn't take my eyes off the ring like I was mesmerized. And somewhere inside me, I suddenly began to feel fear. I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding under my throat. Fear surfaced from its hidden depths and clammy paws enveloped and bound my whole body. I shook my head, trying to pull myself together. And suddenly, as if obeying an unknown force, I put a ring on the ring finger of my right hand. Immediately it became hot. The heat on my hand went up to my shoulder and spread all over my body. Even more boredom and heart. I began to fall into a bottomless well. And after a moment, everything disappeared. I was sound asleep. I woke up to a knock on the front door. I looked at my watch. I turned my head. A strange man stood in the doorway and looked at me curiously. "Hello, Christopher." The man said hello politely. Yes, it's an unforgivable mistake. Not locking the door behind you. Intelligence, my ass. Could have been a nighttime stabbing. Suddenly, I was relieved. They would have wanted to stab him. I wondered if it was from the customer or someone else. I looked around the room. There was nothing suitable at hand. If I threw myself at him with my bare hands, he'd shoot me in flight. The man seemed to read my mind. "Christopher, you're in no danger. You don't need to kill or maim me." The man smiled. "John wants to talk to you. He's been here for a long time." "Did your grandfather come?" "Yes, for about a week now." "Come on. Is he expecting you?" The stranger continued to stand in the doorway, making no attempt to enter the room. At that moment, his cell phone began to cry in his pocket. The man put it to his ear and listened in silence for a few minutes, then handed it to me. "It's for you, Christopher." I heard the familiar voice of my grandfather in the phone. "Come right away. We need to talk. Now you know everything." Grandfather looked at me carefully, and his gaze penetrated into my very soul. He rose from his chair and poured me half a glass of bourbon. "I think it's about time." He set the glass in front of me. I poured the whiskey into my mouth without even tasting it. What my grandfather had told me shook me to the core. I had never seen such filth in my life. My whole being protested against the truth, but not to trust the only person I had left close to me. I had no reason to. I've been surrounded by betrayal and lies for the last 5 years. How stupid do you have to be to ignore the obvious for so long? And there were clues. They were always there, but I didn't want to see them. Trying to hide in the world I invented, I remembered my wedding with a bride in a white dress with witnesses, all rank and file. Betty's surprise at my family's visit. The joy of the lavish gifts. It's too fake, too artificial. Betty knew about the apartment and the car. She knew in advance and skillfully played up the joy and surprise. First lie. Then it became a habit. My long and frequent business trips, her love affair with Stephen, and then my father, the family mix. And she seemed to enjoy it. A wife for everyone. except for the baby. It was a mix-up, an unplanned pregnancy. Could have been from her twin brother. No DNA test can tell. Who's the father? No. I got pregnant by my ex-father's horny brute of a father. So the DNA test in court proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the child was not mine. And I was blindsided. I mean, it was clear it wasn't Stephen's either. Who knew, you ask? Everyone but me. And Mom knew everything. Nothing was hidden from her. She knew and kept quiet. She was afraid of her husband, or she disliked her own son so much. How can you love one and hate the other so much? Betty, I can understand. What am I? A pauper, an outcast, and Stephen is the heir to a vast empire, rich and successful. There's nothing to be gained by living with me. A shameful life of misery and misery. On the other hand, my husband's rich brother and father-in-law. That's where a child comes in handy. Tie it to you tightly and enjoy life. What about love? Come on, we're grown-up girls. More money, more love. I looked longingly at my grandfather. God, what am I still pouring it all in for? My companion showed no emotion. I nodded. One glass wasn't enough. I remembered Kathy. And there's the lie. The failed kidnapping and the beating. The fake love and the passionate breakup. And there I fell for it. I believed it. Oh, right. The Savior's a romantic asshole. She listened to me talking to the elephant and leaked everything. And they got confused. They made up a tale about a stolen daughter and lustful kidnappers. The daughter was played by a fellow craftswoman. Yes, it was clearly visible at the camp. A minx is a minx in the taiga. I didn't notice anything. Batman. I remembered when Kathy was taken in an alley in Yalta. Very natural. It was painful, but gentle. Yes, Kathy was genuinely in love, but not with me, with money. I wonder if he ever slept with her. Probably not. It wasn't his style to get involved with a trivial war. It was all set up from the start. Except for the evil taiga creature and the wolves out there in the taiga, I was supposed to disappear forever, without a trace. No man, no problem. I remembered Camille's attentive gaze at our meeting in the restaurant, and his face was vaguely familiar to me. He'd missed the clue too, and he was a scout too. Thank God the elephant was real. Otherwise, I'd hang myself. I sat there trying to figure out what to do with all this. I felt like I was burning out inside. The door clicked, and a young woman entered the office. She walked through the office and stopped behind my grandfather's back. I looked questioningly into his eyes. Decide for yourself. My grandfather seemed to read my mind. There's a board meeting in half an hour. I think your presence is necessary. The owner and CEO of the steel mill stood up. Camille will help you pick out a suitable suit. Grandfather kissed his assistant's hand, showing me more than just a working relationship. Are you going to put me on the board of directors? To be honest, I was a little puzzled. Instead of who? You have no idea. Grandpa smiled for the first time in our conversation. It's for me. Did you decide to push your favorite grandson into a cushy position? I answered cheekily. That too. But not only that. Your father and your brother have been stealing. They opened fake accounts and transferred the company's money there. Good thing we managed to block their access to the main cash funds. Grandpa looked at his assistant. I stood up and headed for the door. The suit was picked up quickly. I put on a cream vivid shirt under my jacket and tied a dark blue tie. I stopped in front of the mirror. A glamorous office clerk looked back at me. Only the unusual ring on my right hand gave my image some mysterious individuality. In the hallway in front of the door leading to the small conference room, Stephen was excitedly circling. What do you want here? He hissed when he saw me. But I saw him in time. A glimpse. The disappointment in his eyes. Well, of course. It wasn't like I'd perished in the taiga. Unpleasant surprise. Camille ignored Stephen's hiss and opened the door. Come in, Christopher. Everyone was already assembled. No one knew me, so many looked at me in surprise, confused by the table. Grandfather got up from his seat and took a few steps towards me. "Gentlemen, let me introduce you to my grandson Christopher. Have a seat." Grandfather pointed me to a vacant seat at the large round table and sat down in the chairman's chair again. "I have a question," I heard my former father's voice. "Why is there an outsider present at the board of directors?" Indeed, the grandfather was not embarrassed. "But we will correct this mistake now." Standing behind grandfather's chair, a young man put a blue folder and a pen on the table. "This is a notarized document on the transfer of 51% of the shares of the concern to my grandson." The grandfather signed the document in front of him. "Gentlemen," he continued, "I propose to introduce Mr. Christopher to the board of directors of the company." The members of the board raised their hands in unison. "One moment, gentlemen." My former father raised his voice. "The number of members of the board is always constant and cannot change. According to the rules contained in the charter of the company, we cannot introduce a new person at this time." "Indeed," smiled my grandfather. "I propose to remove Mr. Sebastian from the board." I was sitting in a deep armchair behind a huge table on a leather sofa to the right of the table. "It's a little early for you to take over the reins of the company, isn't it? And I'm still in my right mind." Grandpa laughed. There was a knock at the door. Camille put a plate of fruit and a bottle of cognac on the coffee table. "Camille, stay." Grandfather looked at his assistant. She smiled and sat down on the edge of the sofa. To be honest, I was a bit tense about the relationship between my grandfather and his assistant. Who is she, his mistress? That was the first thing that came to mind when looking at their relationship. But isn't she a little young for my grandfather? It was as if my grandfather read my mind. "Camille is the daughter of an old friend of mine. He died tragically with his wife. A quarter of a century ago, Camille was taken away to a boarding school." Grandfather stroked the young woman's hand affectionately. "I tracked her down, took her in and adopted her. She's been with me ever since." I was a little taken aback. Camille looked at me and blushed. "Young man, this is not silver." The old jeweler pursed his lips. "It's platinum. I must tell you the ring is very old, but you understand me. See for yourself." Boris Isakovich handed me the lupa. "I trust you completely." I politely put the instrument on the table. "Can you give me an approximate time of manufacture?" "Well, early 17th century. That's when rings like this were becoming fashionable. It was made by a good jeweler. Fine workmanship. By the way, the enamel is English of the period. So your ring was made in Europe, England or Scotland, most likely. I'd like to know who it belonged to and how it ended up in eastern Siberia," I asked, and put the ring on my finger. "Alas, I do not know that." The old jeweler spread his hands. "Well, are you ready?" I looked at the elephant quite. When the elephant finished chewing. At that moment, the cell phone rang. The helicopter made a circle over its cold waters and began to descend to the rocky shore. The rotating blades swayed the tops of the spruce and pine trees growing along the shore. I was the first to jump on the ground. Then I took my wife in my arms. She flatly refused to let me go alone. The elephant handed me backpacks and weapons, waved to the pilot, and jumped out onto the rocky beach. The helicopter hovered over the shore for a while, then went sharply upward and rushed along the river. Soon the sound of its engine faded around a corner and a motor slipped out of nowhere. It turned toward the shore and soon jabbed its nose into the coastal sand. A man sitting in the stern jumped into the water and pulled the boat to shore. "Good afternoon. How did you get here?" He smiled welcomingly. We shook hands and began to load the equipment. "Well, let's go." I hugged and kissed Camille.